The giant robots are fighting once again, and this time, we're cheating. This is Phantom Brigade, a turn-based tactics / squad shooter type thing, featuring the always bold and brash mechanic of simultaneous turn execution, with the added time hacking mechanic, in which you will be told in advance everything the enemy will do. That's a really great formula for a game that is both a detailed puzzle strategy game, but also supports being a long-term campaign, especially addressing the problems I had with a conceptually very similar game, Into the Breach, the best game I refused to play in years gone by. A couple of videos back I was ranting about how Valkyria Chronicles privately innovated the turn-based tactics squad shooter genre with its integration of real-time mechanics. And here in Phantom Brigade, we've got another integration of real-time mechanics, giving us another chance to snatch at that low-hanging fruit I've been idolizing over the years, a fruit labeled, what if we made a turn-based squad shooter that wasn't the most basic 90s XCOM jank? Phantom Brigade is an example of such an effort. And while it has its hand on the low-hanging fruit, does it actually pluck it, and is that fruit any good to eat? As this analogy spirals into irrelevance, let me invite you into this campaign commentary of Phantom Brigade, where I will talk through my experience with the game and go off on many rants about many things. In fact, I actually have 3 campaigns recorded in this game, and I'll be compressing them together here, and the reason for doing that will become clear later. Did I play the game so much because I liked it? Actually, maybe not. I know, it's your boy Offie D, I can't just say what I mean, there has to be this whole drama and a couple of freakouts along the way. So we'll get to all that later. It's time for the turn-based tactics squad shooter with simultaneous turns and perfect information with mech building elements, resource management elements, and even roguelike elements for no discernible reason. Subgenre name for this pending, that is Phantom Brigade. Let's introduce the basic concept with a look at the tutorial. Some friendly robots are out for a stroll and suddenly they're attacked by some tanks and unfriendly robots. It's a war! Don't worry about the lore, there almost isn't any. The factions have names, although admittedly I don't remember what our faction was called. It literally doesn't come up. Nothing really comes up. It's not a game about its story or setting at all. Quite the opposite to my experience with Songs of Silence previously. Instead, the game is about this mechanic, the simultaneous turns. You work with a timeline, in which you plot out moves and attacks over a 5-second window, and as you scrub the timeline it shows you what the enemy will do. You can probably guess the idea as you work around them, so for example, if the enemy are firing at you, arrange to be in cover beforehand. If they're in your line of sight, arrange to fire at them as and when you can. That's pretty much the entire game, from minute 1 to hour 100, divided into 5-second windows. Now I really liked this off the bat, the puzzle aspect it brings in and the power of seeing your beautifully crafted turn executed is straight up addictive. That said, the hyper brainworm's problems with the specifics of how they do this are also evident from the beginning. This is the sort of horrible UX lubrication-based perspective on games, which makes me explode with frustration about how close the game comes to being amazing. But the thing about UX is that your UX is as good as the weakest part of the UX. If anything in the gameplay cycle breaks the flow state, then the flow state is broken. So it doesn't matter how many trillions of amazing UX decisions you made, if something that keeps happening is breaking the flow, then it's over. So the timeline being one click too many steps to edit makes me consign the game to the abyss immediately, although there are workarounds, so we'll get to that. For now, it can be summarized by saying, setting up your turns takes a long time. This will be a theme we'll revisit again and again, and one I need to make explicit in my commentary because I'll be cutting out most of the planning I'm referring to. Yes, it's another Offie D commentary where you won't see the thing I'm complaining about, but you have to believe me anyway. Let's just get started, and I'll gradually present my meltdowns in parts, roughly in the order I had them back during the gameplay. I might even squeeze in a meltdown about the plot, because of a particular element that only gets mentioned right here at the start. So let's take a look at what we got. The red team is attacking the blue/green team. our nation has been occupied by a different one, and a guerrilla war carries on for several years, but our special unit, the Phantom Brigade, remained in hiding and will now suddenly emerge to reconquer the land, oust the hated red team, so that the glorious reign of the blue team can recommence. I sound cynical, don't I? But that's not by chance. The game doesn't go further than I've gone here. The enemy are a named faction. I think it was Kassad or something. It doesn't come up much, but at least it's not just the Empire. Our faction was named Fearland, by the way, surely a reference to the classic JRPG Shining Force EXA, but the less said about that, the better. There's room for an Ace Combat style alternative history and invented nationalism to kind of hype up the war. As it stands, there is no good or evil, right or wrong, yet nor is it a grey morality both-sidesism type affair like Valkyria Chronicles. It's more of a neither-sides-ism type affair. We're equally without attributes, other than what our colour is. It's sports war, it's red versus blue. And blue has a massive advantage, so it's good we're playing as them. That advantage is a strange device that allows them to see 5 seconds into the future. Yes, the conceit of the mechanics does have an in-universe explanation. It's the effect of a machine you have in your truck. I want to talk about mechanics before I go off on the scenario, so let's just see what the game does for now. We'll ignore this premise and move on to play a squad shooter with simultaneous turns on a purely for fun basis. Games for fun? Not on my watch. And to start talking about mechanics, I'm going to have to give you a massive rant about the main mechanical thing I don't like, and then maybe the video will mellow out after that. Topic: movement orders and the most minor problems inputting commands. At the start of the game, I was sometimes struggling to add movement orders to my mechs. There are 2 problems with the movement order system. One is this idea that when you give a movement order, it doesn't place it at the current position in the timeline you're looking at. It goes back and places it at the earliest possible point. To my mind, this doesn't and still doesn't make sense, because it doesn't fit in with how the decision-making process goes. I never stopped getting surprised by this. In practice, I'm moving through the timeline, seeing when I can move and where I can not get shot. For example, you scrub to the point when the enemy stops shooting at you, and you think, now I'll step out, and you give the move order, but what this does is put the move order back when you first got into the cover, so you walk out while the enemy is still shooting at you by default. That's the core problem. The intended input flow here is you first work out where in the timeline you want to begin your move, then you go back to the end of your previous move when you entered the cover, and you add a wait command, which you then stretch to roughly the point in the timeline you discovered before. Then when you add your move, it will append itself after the wait and end up at the right point in the timeline. So there's a bit of back and forth there. The other option is to input the move in the wrong place, but then drag it along the timeline to the right start point. Although you do lose a load of intel on what will happen while moving if you do it this way. And that might matter. Although the real problem comes when you pair this with another little missing feature I felt the absence of, which is the ability to edit your moves. If you want to take one additional step, or end the move slightly earlier to begin firing without moving, something like that, you have to delete your order and give it again. And I found myself wanting to be able to just drag the move order shorter on the timeline, like you're really editing a video. It doesn't sound that bad until you find that in practice, you need to experiment and investigate 10 different variations on a possible move to find the one you need. Then you lock that in and move on to give orders to a different mech, but then something you're doing during that decision-making process might make you think, oh, I need to change the orders on the previous one if I'm going to do this. And you go back and you have to delete the orders again, and it's not some little quibble. It becomes the most time-consuming thing because while it sounds small, it's most of what you actually do in the game. So I found myself really liking the timeline with activity blocks approach. I really like how you drag things around. I like how it visualizes what will happen on the map. And it's overall super smooth at first, but I still think we're 1 or 2 usability features away from a super smooth continuous input of orders situation. All that said, this does go away with experience a bit. After 30 hours, I was still going ugh as I realized my move order was like actually given 2 attacks back in the timeline because I didn't put a wait command down because I didn't know how long I wanted to wait in advance because that's what I was looking for while scanning forward in the timeline. It all slightly doesn't work, that's my point. I should add that weight commands are placed on the timeline with a curious UX, where the length of the weight is based on the position of the ground relative to the mouse, with the mouse's height in this equation being that of the mech in question. What that means is, if you're standing on a roof, most places you can put the mouse are now a certain distance above the ground, which means you can't input short weights anymore. I just don't really know what the flow was meant to be with giving the weight commands, and feels like it could have been easier or just really simple, like painting it on the timeline. I had to get to a point when it didn't feel like the game was constantly slapping my hands off the mouse as I tried to do things. And there's one more point to make about all of this, which I only actually remember here at the last second, and that's this. You can't click on the ground to say move here. You can't click on an enemy to say shoot this. That's really old school, not letting you do this. Instead, you activate move mode via the UI, and then you click where you need to go. Can it not contextually realize that clicking on a piece of ground is a move order without activating move mode, without that extra step? Requiring mode changes to make inputs is another of these dreaded one click too many extra steps. It doesn't necessarily have to do this, so it should give you the option to go without. I feel like we discovered this in the 90s at some point. We need to bring this back. If you told me I can fix one thing to improve the flow, improve the UX, that's going to be what it is. Just contextual clicking to skip menus. I can't believe I forgot to mention that first and foremost, and I can't believe the developers forgot to add that feature. We've now done the first couple of tutorial battles, and there was something here about looking at a replay. I tried this, and I thought, oh, it's broken, I'm going to have to rant about this later, but actually it isn't supposed to do what I thought it was supposed to do, that is, be a replay of the battle. I will be back for more on this because I ended up discovering the truth, and it requires full rants. The next tutorial part explains camping. No, it's not about to become a cozy camping simulator, though it probably should. The idea is you have limited supplies to restore your mech and pilot's health, and all damage is persistent. In practice, there are ways for damage to not be persistent, so I actually camped extremely rarely. But yes, you can see the idea is you have to be careful which pilots and mechs you use, as they will be permanently damaged, and healing them requires rare resources and indeed time. And the campaign map does have some strict time mechanics that aren't present here in the tutorial, so we'll get to that. Mainly, the campaign map is a very pretty menu, on which it shows you possible missions you can undertake against the sinister Red Regime. Usually there are 2 or 3 and you pick your poison. The missions have archetypes that roughly define what you have to do, all being minor variants on kill them all. We'll see more details when the campaign starts for real, and as we get into the detail, this is where I have to edit everything out and just leave for you the note, the claim, that there's a lot of work that goes into putting your moves together. As I said before, it takes a long time. It's most of the game, and I'm going to mostly cut it out. So we just have to have you imagine that there is like 30 hours of just sort of really slowly doing what you see happening on the screen. Gradually building and processing timelines, and wrestling with the UX nonsense from before. We can at least appreciate the rules of combat that define the logic behind this sometimes difficult input process. The enemy will pick mechs of yours to attack, usually the ones closest to them. Then in your turn, you take that mech and place it out of the enemy's line of sight. The enemy will then try to make the attack anyway, shooting into walls, floors, ceilings, and if you're really sneaky, you can get them to shoot at other enemies for you. In this way, most damage can be avoided, and the mechs not taking fire this turn will just unload on the enemy at your leisure as your heat capacity allows. We'll get back to that. Fights take place at extremely short ranges, with most weapons in the game having a maximum range of about 50 meters, which is extra short considering that the mech itself is already like 10 meters across when it extends its weapon to shoot. The final main consideration is that if you collide with another entity, enemy or ally, it causes a crash that cancels your turn and often some of your next turn as well, although this can be strategically used because of the rules about how crashing works. Maybe we'll get to that. You can cancel enemy turns basically, as you might guess. That will be our game. You simply do battles like this a certain amount of times. I'm going to shrug and offer 40 times as the amount of times you do this, and broadly speaking it continues throughout the game just as it began here in the tutorial. The game plays all its cards right in the first couple of hours. The other tutorial mission here is the destruction archetype, the one that is the most different to the rest of the game. In these, you only need to take out buildings. Most weapons let you attack ground to shoot anything in the environment, so you can wail on buildings all day without much pushback, and indeed if there is some pushback from the so-called enemies. In destruction missions, it's most welcome because the AI will make no effort to establish things like line of sight or effective range before shooting, so they will shoot frantically around the streets of their own bases if they think you're behind a building or something, which can make these missions extremely easy because they just complete themselves even if you just stand still, as we'll see at some point, I'm sure. Now we've got to talk replays. Replays, I nearly got really mad at the game about this topic, and even though it wasn't as egregious as I thought upon closer inspection, let me give you my residual complaint anyway. Topic: how dare they make the replay system an afterthought? Here's the deal, you end a mission, there's a big shiny green button that says replay. Actually, it's there after every turn because all it does is replay what happens in that turn, so at the end it shows the final turn. But surely, you cry, in a game about gradually putting together a timeline of actions, playing the whole timeline is the inevitable final payoff. Spend half an hour curating a 45-second sequence moment by moment, then you get those 45 seconds, right? Well, apparently that was never the plan. However, possibly due to annoying people like me freaking out, the developers at some point did add the ability to replay all of the turns, only they couldn't get it to work properly, so it's hidden behind this experimental features option you have to opt into, and it comes with the warning that it makes these massive replay files. It's glitchy and sometimes inaccurate and sometimes you're invisible or something. It's not quite done, and I don't think they'll be back to finish it. This indicates two things. Number one, combat isn't purely deterministic, / the RNG isn't only pseudo-random, it's real random. They have to record what happens, literally. They can't reproduce the battle by storing its RNG seeds. As in, the exact path a missile takes is genuinely random, so can only be reproduced by having massive files storing all of its attributes for every frame and then reading it back. And even then it's going to have rounding errors that will stack up over time. Pretty annoying. But thing number two, and this is the real point, is that they didn't want you to watch the full replay in the first place. I find that baffling. To me, when you're designing this game, having the ability to view the battle replay is core. It's like the whole point of making the game. You should design the whole game around doing that. So it's got all the features it needs to do it, but only for 5 seconds, like the actual entire timeline viewing part. That's the missing piece. Or semi-missing, and this is why my point is watered down here, because it actually is in the game, sort of, kind of, as an afterthought, and it doesn't really work. I just don't like the idea that they would not have focused on this. It's analogous to me to editing a video, being a video editor and having this timeline presentation. Isn't it better if your video editor lets you play the video back, like beyond the most recent 5 seconds? Isn't that something that should have been a planned feature from before the first character of code was set down? To me, in a game that's about stopping time and planning things out, seeing it happen all in real time is the main feature to me. Like, I would sacrifice loads of other things in the game to get that replay feature working front and center. The implication that it was a low priority or an unwanted idea makes me question why they didn't just make a normal turn-based tactics game instead. Surely it was obvious that a time-bending pause input gradual crafting of a dance-type game needs to let you see the masterpiece. Not needs in the mechanical sense, but in the cultural sense. As a project, as a product, the audience needs to see what they've done, even if the game itself already has all the numbers it needs to go on. I don't want to be here writing these notes while throwing the previous page into a fire each time I start a new one, even though that would benefit the world immensely. To quote the ancient sage of video game analysis, what were they thinking? We have finished the tutorial map. The world is divided into various maps, as we'll see in a moment, and in between you can recruit new pilots if you can afford them. Here I ended up buying someone because they were named Devin, although I did have to pay 250 basic components, among other rarer components, with components of 3 colors being the currency of the game. No idea when we stopped the use of money. Good to see you can get people into life or death situations with payments of random lengths of metal, cathode ray tubes, maybe some plastic piping. It's because the game has a crafting system, and they wanted the crafting parts to also be the currency for non-crafting things. And this is partially because many of the game systems were made at different times and stitched together, which I'll get to way later. For now, I don't know why you can do this. I don't know why the elite special forces of the Finlandian military only has 2 people in it and has to scrounge for old bits of pipe to attract more. Turns out we're in a video game. And the video gaminess intensifies as we enter the world map. You can see we've got several regions to conquer, although you actually only need to take certain ones to proceed with the game. Plus, it's actually random which ones you're allowed to go to, meaning your route across the map is different each playthrough. This makes almost no difference because all the regions are basically the same. There isn't any geography-based gameplay or a reason for this to be a map, basically. It's a background of a drop-down menu with some text. The only point I'll leave you with is this idea of the game playing differently if you start over is something that pops up in lots of different places, and I didn't know that yet while playing, so I'll save the dark revelations therein. Here we're finally in the main game loop, so what we're going to do for this video is take a look at one complete loop, as it were, and if you like what you see, then you'll like this game, so long as you think you like it so much, you want to do it quite a few times. Let's get started. Each map has a time limit, counting down to something bad happening. We'll see what it actually is soon enough. You can reverse the timer a certain amount and gain a certain amount of points by selecting and completing missions. Here things are actually distinct from a text-based drop-down because time passes as you move to the mission. So you need to pick ones that are close enough to where you start / where the previous mission was. As for what the missions are, it's mostly randomly generated. Randomly generated content, you say. I'm writing that down in my inspector's notebook. Yes, we'll come back to this. We need 3 war points to progress, and you can get 1 by doing this elimination mission, which is simply kill some enemies. Obviously, killing enemies is the only thing you can do in the game mechanically, so this will be a pretty good representation of all of the missions, with the exception of the one where you kill buildings, as previously noted. Before we deploy, we need to put our mechs together. You can take up to 4 mechs, and I've just finished building the 3rd one. Here's the mech engineer part of the game, where you have a pool of arms, legs, weapons, and other misc, which you piece together to make a mech with particular stats, abilities, all that good stuff. I want to skip this part for now because we don't have much to choose from, but I will say the UI looks nice. And there is a variety of equipment available in the game that was surprisingly broad given how simple the mechanics are. And yes, many of the weapons are useless, rant. We'll see some examples later. For now, we're loaded up with an assault rifle mech, a rocket launcher mech, and a sniper rifle mech. Let's start shooting those weapons at red things waving about ahead of us in the timeline, like some kind of futuristic robo-bullfighting. In the battle, as mentioned, there is a lot of stuff to be doing, lots of time to be spent experimenting and checking out different possible moves, working out how far you can move in a turn and where you might want to be for the next turn. When it comes to your attacks, the principal consideration is heat. I'll probably go off on a wild jolly into the commentary wilderness when it comes to heat. So for now, just know that you don't have to reload, you have infinite ammo, so really, it would be just a question of shooting at the enemy whenever they're in your line of sight, but these masterfully crafted war machines do overheat, to the point they lose health if you fire 12 shots within 5 seconds. Wah, perhaps more on this later. Over the course of some 15 minutes of inputs, I've put together about 30 seconds of actual real-time movement, now shown in slow motion in the "you can only see this if you sign a thing saying you don't mind if we brick your PC" full replay mode. I remember thinking there's not going to be any quick way of saying that the battles are basically loads of micro decisions, swinging the camera around to see what can see what, making a move that's 65 meters long, then deleting it to make a move that's 60 meters long to see if it leaves time to shoot or changes the damage indicator in some way. You come away with level ups, some currency, and any damage taken remains on both pilots and mechs, as I said, but you also gain fatigue on your pilots, and that stops you using them again so hastily. This is why the game lets you have 9 pilots in total, I think, despite you only being able to use 4 at a time. You need to cycle in reserves and consider which pilot traits are best for the mission, or who you want to gain experience points, all that good XCOM-like stuff. Although different pilots perform more similarly than different operator classes in XCOM, so that's a bad example perhaps. What you do is you level up pilots who have no experience to unlock a class on them, which turns out to be a choice of 4, a randomly assigned choice of 4. What your pilots can do is also randomized to some extent each time you play. That's another note for that inspector's notebook. Noted, noted. Something's going on here. Now let me get back to fatigue, because I wanted to make a really smarmy rant about it. Topic: this game needs its fatigue system, but it doesn't earn it, and other timey-wimey considerations. That's my roundabout way of saying fatigue makes sense from a pure mechanical design perspective, but not the more holistic game design perspective, and that is a roundabout way of saying fatigue is stupid in this game. The idea is you have to either rotate pilots, as I said, or use the aforementioned camping system to stop and let the pilots rest, which costs time on the campaign map. The problem with this is the questions it invokes about what fatigue even is, because it's not tiredness as we understand it. For example, Devon in our squad has a max fatigue of 2, and you always get 1 fatigue if you deploy in a mission no matter what you do. But we saw that while missions appear very involved from our perspective, the pilots only have to fight for about 30 seconds, with even the biggest battles lasting about a minute. Like, damn Devon, you're not even willing to put in literally 2 minutes of work after I gave you all my precious sticks of RAM to buy you. When you factor in that me, the player character, the commander, tells everyone exactly what to do using a time machine, the pilots don't even have to make any decisions for that flash of combat. It's like, okay, so what exactly is so tiring about piloting a mech? Indeed, so tiring that fatigue doesn't even go away while you're not piloting it. Yes, the mystery deepens when you ask why your command vehicle has to be stationary to undo fatigue, why this camping mechanic exists. The pilots are allowed to sit in the hammocks while we drive, guys, it's fine, or just stay in the mech and sleep there till the next fight, have a quick coffee, a minute of work tops, and then back to sleep. What we needed was to integrate fatigue using the lore, that's my point here. Fatigue needed to be something more like the psychic damage of having your commander wire you information from the future at the speed of light and submitting your body to the pure determinism of the unforgiving universe, which can only be undone by expressing your free will on a pleasant camping trip and just being off duty in general, being allowed to leave the base. We need some reason why you can't just sit in a chair while we drive, and that's like still really exhausting to you. Something bigger. I think the game does need you to burn through pilots to justify giving them RNG skills, which we'll be back to. And also, it's a chance to narratively signify the weight of this time machine, and to hint as to why everyone else doesn't do something like this, or why it's really dangerous. I'm a cynic. I want it to be that your pilots literally die from using the prediction machine, and the handful of guys you get for missions are just suicidal fanatics. And you can talk about the politics of that, and how Phelan feels, and how the Reds react to you doing this. All sorts of rubbish is there for the fanfiction. Well, I guess I went off topic. A full time machine rant will be coming soon. For now, your pilots need a break every 30 seconds, despite their work actually being something between playing a video game and watching your commander play a video game with their hands on your hands on the controller via some mind control. And this is a very arbitrary limitation which screws you over in the game, and you might be left wondering why it doesn't really make any sense. And yes, it does benefit the game to have it here, it's doing something in the game, but whether it's good to have it here, well, it depends what sort of format you want the game to have, and I'll get back to this later. We took a load of damage in that last fight, including actually losing a mech and pilot due to a surprise uptick in difficulty. I'll mention how difficulty scaling works much later when I eventually stumbled upon some secrets to do with that. For now, to heal up, I made the mistake of camping. Not only is camping worse than I thought, in that it only heals a certain amount of damage on a certain amount of your things, but it takes 6 hours to do. And that was enough to leave me fresh out of luck with the time limit. Probably could have predicted that. Maybe I wanted to see what would happen. And what happens is, the game claimed the enemy had some time to get dug in and locate your base, and they attacked you a bit off camera, causing some damage to your mechs and pilots. In other words, the punishment for me healing here was that I ended up with the damage again. It also refreshes the mission pool, which might be a problem in some specific circumstance, and it spawns a patrol mission that doesn't give you any points, so you have to drive away from it to avoid wasting time fighting them basically. And I think that's it. One secret the game doesn't tell you is that I think you can't actually lose. You can retreat from the map to restart it at full health, but the enemy doesn't get anything, and you keep all the resources you got. So they're not really fighting against you in any way, as the text sort of implies they might be. Not really sure about how it works though. Here's the next little sidestep in our game loop. You can sometimes head to points of interest, which in most cases offer you the choice of taking a small payment of say 100 components, or there'll be some kind of look closer option, which is basically an option to take the mystery box and get something else. Sometimes it's like, you saw a fireworks show and you lose fatigue, which is nice. Boss threw a pizza party, now we're ready for 90 seconds of additional war. Here's the next mission, a super easy one, just kill 2 enemies. No problem, 10 seconds of work. My blood-sucking crew will be like, the minimum billable period is an hour, so we did an hour of work technically. You know how it is. I wanted to show you a mistake I made pretty often, which I'd like to blame on the game for now at least. That is, having our mechs crash immediately. At the start of the battle I'm going through plotting out routes for each mech one at a time. And sometimes I didn't notice that their routes will cross over right as they start because they spawn right beside each other, causing a big crash. I'd like to see the game warn you if you've input a move on the timeline that includes a crash. It would be marked in some obvious way. Just because I found it easy to forget where each mech's going to be at each second in the timeline. So if you are starting close together and are all walking in a different direction, something, it was all somebody else's fault. My solution to this when it did happen, which was somewhat often, was to just rage quit and redo the first turn. It does autosave at the start of battle, so it's easy enough to restart a fight. This will otherwise be an Iron Man playthrough, but I did allow myself the wiggle room of reloading if I crashed in a way that made me too disappointed in myself to go on. Another little mistake is visible here that I didn't start avoiding until much later. I'm having this mech dodge an attack that I don't need to. Our time machine is telling me we're going to get hit with a load of bullets very soon, and I'm considering redirecting that fire into local civilian structures instead. The thing is, if I had stood completely still, I actually wouldn't have been shot because I'm outside the effective range of the enemy's weapon. This is denoted by that cone on the ground closer to the enemy, but I didn't realize that's what that meant until after this campaign for starters. I also presumed the enemy wouldn't try to fire at you if you were outside of their effective range, and they absolutely will waste their turn doing this. So while the planning view indicates you'll get hit, all those hits will do exactly 0 damage if they're beyond this hard range limit, and you can thus ignore them entirely. There is a UI element that lets you look up how much damage an enemy attack is going to do to you and discover this eventually. However, at first I was just avoiding all attacks on principle and never checking how much damage it was going to do, so that's why it took me so long to realize this. And when I do check those stats here and there, some of the hyper worms I hinted at before come into play, where I totally misinterpreted what the stats the game is reporting actually mean, only heightening my desperate flailing to avoid taking 0 damage. We'll be back to this in a bit. We completed that mission, so the next part of our big loop is salvage. You can pick up a certain amount of non-destroyed enemy components to use yourself. And like with fatigue, the reason it's a certain amount is, well, to keep it simple, and also to let you have an upgrade that says +5 salvage amount somewhere. It's something to do, isn't it? Something to upgrade. I'm not really cynical enough to care about this. It's only that the way this salvage mechanic was screaming to be integrated into the game is that you pick how long you will remain stationary on the map in that time limit section after the battle, and that determines how much salvage you'll get, and perhaps how much repairing you can do as well. This gives you another use for having a time limit mechanic and makes some strategy out of it. You might not bother salvaging things to race to another battle, or if things are chill, just sit there for 6 hours melting everything down and patch all of your junk up. They wanted these things to be compartmentalized mechanics, but they already seem to fit together so nicely, just combine them. So that's that. We've now got enough war points to fill the points bar. What does this do? It unlocks a second points bar. Yes, they got me here. There are 3 phases to completing a map, which are number 1, get points, number 2, get more points, and number 3, a boss or special mission will appear with no time limit. In the second phase, different mission types can spawn, but again I've probably let slip that I don't think the presence of different mission types really means much in this game, because the mechanics are all just team deathmatch. We needed some capture the flag at the very least. Basically I'll go on to fight some more, this time taking my favourite mission type, the battlefield, which tends to be bigger fights that feature some of Finland's regular military units to fight alongside you. This is something that super Mountain Blade heads like me will always scream about here, the desire to fight as part of a larger organisation and see that organisation. Well, you get a bit of it here. You can occasionally fight as part of the main army a little bit, and maybe it's something like you're contributing to an overall victory, reaching out for this validation I'm hungry for, like in something like Mountain Blade, or even the strategy classic Godless Tactics, but alas, it is ever out of reach, no validation for me. You can even give the Finland guys orders, allowing you to sacrifice them, I mean direct them in such a way that best preserves mission-critical assets, probably reducing the persistent damage you'll take. And don't worry, green units get deleted after battles anyway, so you might as well squeeze them for all they're worth. They're mortal, they'll die in the end anyway. Such are the inspiring lectures at the OFID Officer Training Academy. As we battle, let's go back to one of the million things I've hinted at recently. Topic: Hyperworms Part 1. What does the percentage on the hit indicator mean? And related discoveries. You might have seen that when you go to click on an enemy to target them, the biggest UI element associated with it is a percentage. Now, I played Phantom Brigade for 36 hours in total, and it was somewhere around hour 25 that I actually realized what this number means. Certainly it was after my first campaign. The hyperworms here is that the developer will be screaming, "You dumbass, it's so obvious what this means. How could you even play the game without reverse engineering it, even if you never looked it up or whatever?" And I don't really know. This is a point where I have to simply lay my insanity out, and you can pick through the worms, perhaps taste a couple, and decide if my case has any merit. That case is, in short, I assumed the percentage was chance to hit for the majority of my Phantom Brigade career. It's actually a measure of whether you are in range, as in 100% means yes, you're in range, 0% means you aren't. And the numbers in between are occasionally used for the few meters at the end of your range that give partial damage, things like that. Isn't that a somewhat unusual way of showing this? And why is the number so big compared to the other stuff? What is that other stuff? See the white numbers there. That's your attack, or the damage you can do, versus enemy health. I'll show you the full damage system worms later. Now I just want to say that I did reverse engineer that this was damage. And this only cemented the impression that the percentage must be accuracy then, because damage is already covered. Because if you were going to show damage fall off with range, you would change the damage number, right? The percentage must be unrelated. No, it's a number based on the max possible damage, and then you multiply through the percentage being the to what extent are you in range -ometer, and then, and this is the real kicker, then you also multiply through accuracy. Yes, there is actually RNG-based accuracy. It's just not shown on this panel. That's what the cone on the ground when you aim means. You'll hit somewhere in the arc it defines. So your shots will essentially travel the whole map in one of these randomly chosen directions within the cone, but beyond a certain distance, beyond the end of the cone, while the shot's still traveling, it does no damage when it hits things. Because we accidentally placed all of our hope in a weapons system that only has 50 meters of effective range very strictly, and more investigations into the mysteries of range in this game will be coming later, I eventually discovered the truth by looking carefully at replays and seeing that sometimes you did get hit by shots but didn't lose any health, and that was the clue that led me to realizing the thing I pointed out a minute ago, where the AI will take 0% shots at you, not 0% chance to hit because they still hit you, but 0% on the am I in range-o-meter, which then multiplies damage down to 0. In practice then, you can stand still in the open, far away from the enemy. They will fire at you for 0 damage, happily enough, a strategy we shall use later on. So this is it a user error or user interface error question? Did anybody else who hasn't played this game think that was accuracy? Does the layout or mechanics of the game in general warrant the use of an in-range-o-meter multiplier approach to presenting attack damage? I put it to you that all of this can be simplified by actually doing the multiplication and just showing the results instead. Like, you know, with this computer I'm running the game on, my computer telling me that my damage is going to be 73% of 484. It's kind of like if the postman brought you pieces of paper that tell you there's a letter for you at the post office. Okay, well, why didn't you bring me the thing you're telling me about then, since you made all this effort? The damage and range-o-meter need to combine or otherwise be rearranged, I claim. The only silver lining is that my belief that its percentage chance to hit still leads to correct gameplay decisions, because I want to take 100% chance to hit shots right, and that's also going to give me max damage, so that's still good. It's a case of a broken clock is right twice a day, but actually the day is turn-based and the decision making happens at only those 2 times, so it ends up being right most of the time, as the old saying goes. You might have noticed during that battle, our star player sharpshooter Devin died of tiredness. Yes, if you deploy when at max fatigue, your health continually drains. And I found out the hard way that it drains fast enough to kill you not long into a battle. I probably thought I'd just take a bit of damage and heal it later or something. You need to avoid using fatigued pilots at all, really. Luckily, you can die once or twice, and it's not too catastrophic, just like in real life, because you get trauma points instead of dying. So now Devon is traumatized from that time they had to stay awake for like 9 hours straight, and you get a permanent debuff from that. Delightful. I needed more pilots to avoid this issue, so I went back to our base at the edge of the map to browse the slave markets. Then I saw a button saying you can repair and heal here, and I decided to partake, learning immediately that this costs 12 hours of your time, and I had 13 hours to spare. So yeah, let's have the time cost of the action there in the text describing what the button does. Let's go wild with that. Is there a reason to not mention this? We learned the hard way, the best way, and it says once again we were found by hunter squads but escaped with only a minor injury on Devon. No rest for the wicked. Then it spawns patrols, and I guess there seems to be a missing stage here. If you actually get hit with the patrol, it makes you do a special mission where you defend the base for a set number of turns. One of the ultra-rare different mission types with a consideration to make that isn't just killing everything immediately. We'll see that later on. It feels like that is what should happen when the time limit runs out, right? Instead, it just kind of says, well, it says that happens, and then if you don't drive off for a while, it really does happen in the gameplay. The scenario and the gameplay they made for it seem to have slipped past each other, possibly because of whether or not you take damage being determined by an actual mission. As in, if you play the mission and don't take damage, the developers might be mad at you because they wanted to punish you here. So instead they just hit you with a "the plot says you took damage" text box, and then made the mission associated with it completely optional. So it's not a very gamey way of doing this, I accuse. Let players skill their way out of trouble if they can. Or indeed, lose the map and get the base wrecked if they can't. I think they needed this because without it, I kind of just think you could delete the time limit and just forget about the whole idea. Like, it's already dissonant with the rest of the gameplay, because the enemy obviously aren't actually resisting or plotting against you, so it's all very tacked on. Instead, it's better to force a soft time limit by actually having an enemy strike team moving around the map, gathering strength, getting harder to avoid, and you could interact with it or distract it. You know, game stuff. Gameplay, yes. Text box on a timer trigger, no. That's all I really want to say here. With things as they stand, running out of time isn't a massive deal, because to refill the timer, normally you have to do a battle, and the bits of pieces of damage you'll probably take in that battle are going to be about the same as the damage done by the epic battle to escape which took place while you weren't looking, sorry, just believe me, it happened, text adventure event. And the text adventure event also fully restores your time limit, not just partially like a battle does, so it might be better to just take the hit with the text adventure. While I did continue to religiously avoid running out of time after this, I think maybe a more pro strategy is to deliberately run out of time here and there, to buy more time for visiting points of interest to get more resources. Then just don't use the pilots or mechs that get damaged for the rest of the map, and you can take some free heals after you defeat each boss. So you'll end up being richer and indeed less stressed about having a massive time limit counting down on the screen if you just let it run out sometimes. That's my claim. I'm re-equipping the squad, now expanded to 4 mechs, for a demolition mission. As for reasons that are completely gamey and probably stupid, there are 3 types of damage in the game: armor, pilot, and structure, and you need to do structure damage to kill buildings. You could kind of tell what they're going for here. Maybe it was supposed to be like different ammunition types with different penetration or something, but also it's like, well, if projectiles can damage armor, can they not also damage buildings? Like, it's the same physics principle, right? If something can pierce armor and kill the pilot, why can't it pierce a wall, for example? The topic of what can and can't pierce walls is actually a sore point for the game, and we'll be back to it. But on a lighter note, there is a related request I had that demolition missions inspire. I think mechs should be able to break through buildings in melee / with movement. This isn't a very reasonable request, it's more that I wanted there to be some sense of power in these mechs, conveyed by them perhaps just stepping through buildings, Godzilla style. Although I guess they aren't actually that giant as giant robots go. Somehow it feels the terrain and cover should be all like the props in Dark Souls that just get obliterated if you graze past them, because you're just that kinda mover. And of course the idea of bursting into a city street and unloading on stuff like in Brigador seems like a good play for a game that doesn't really have cover mechanics per se, so it's ripe for all the terrain having a different source of interaction instead, that being blowing it up. So I'm busy microing away here, dodging bullets and getting the enemy to shoot their own buildings, and while I've got the hang of giving orders by the looks of it, the transition into having 4 mechs began to make me think that it's getting to be too much. As in, it takes too long to input the orders for 4 mechs. The turns are so short that it's then an anticlimax, because only a few seconds of game will happen after you spent many minutes experimenting with the different combos of what your 4 mechs could do together. Not that action combos really matter, the mechs can't interact in any way, which only intensifies the primal need for me to say that the game might be better if the squad size was smaller, literally the opposite of what everyone says about every squad shooter. More on this later. We've been collecting various weapons, parts and attachments far more than we need, and in your base you can strip them down to convert them into currency. All very nice, but there is also this idea that if you scrap enough of your spare weapons, you unlock blueprints to manufacture that weapon itself. And indeed, there is a whole mechanic and upgrade tree to do with manufacturing mech parts and weapons in the base. As if they were way more disposable and less permanent and less common. I'll never get to show you these mechanics because I never once found any use for them. Basically, I don't really know what all of this is about and I didn't use it, so that's my commentary and that is the point unto itself. With that topic avoided, let's do a different one instead. Topic: melee weapons are strange. Yes, I got a sword as a drop from that previous battle, and I thought, well, now it's time to go full anime. Giant robot with a sword, the ultimate weapon system for sure. Melee attacks are strange because you probably think they'll come with the downside of having to first enter melee range. But the melee range on a sword is listed as about 30 meters, which is further than small guns fire in this game, with 40 to 60 meters being the normal engagement range for most stuff. How can a sword have a 30 meter range? If you're thinking the sword is 30 meters long, you'll be very disappointed, but enough about my dating profile.mp3, it's actually because melee attacks come with this mandatory great leap forward Mao would approve. This, funnily enough, means melee weapons suck at close quarters because you need enough room to jump to be allowed to swing. In other words, your 30-meter range sword also has a minimum range of 15 meters, so you can't actually use it in quote-unquote melee range. And the swinging of the sword takes more time in the timeline than firing a handgun, so it's quite a commitment. It really seems like a melee weapon should give you 2 attacks, a normal and a dashing variant, with the normal one being a 5-meter range, hit things as you pass them by type deal, with a short time to execute and low heat, so you can weave through the battlefield slashing and using the enemy as shields up close. Instead, you actually have to keep your distance and try to get into open spaces so you can jump. Especially bad if you want to melee the same enemy twice in one turn, because you have to jump in, run away, and then jump in again, and it just seems really weird and convoluted. And such delicate maneuvers do need to take crashing into account. Yes, remember in this game, if you touch the enemy, one or both of you will crash. Generally the lighter mech in a collision crashes, and as melee mechs need to be lightweight to be fast, it will probably be you. That deletes your turn and makes you ragdoll helplessly while getting shot by whatever was targeting you this turn, so avoiding this is essential. But how do you avoid touching an enemy you're trying to engage with a melee weapon? With difficulty is the answer. When you jump forwards and slash, you have to be extra sure your mech will not carry on into the enemy, which in practice means you have to attack to the side of them. It's just lame and paranoia-inducing for it to be like this. You could just say you're immune to crashing while you have a sword or a build that's designed to make contact, or that melee attacks knock enemies back out of your way so they'll be pushed away out of your collision box and you don't crash, something like that. But I also think combining melee with crashing mechanics is doable. If you allow a melee crash to be its own thing, and to be treated as a grapple of sorts, as in if the enemy isn't destroyed by your attack, your jump knocks them over and you end up pinning them down, so you kind of both crash with like you on top of them. Well, I'm thinking of anime again, clearly. So many banana skins on this battlefield. It just feels like melee could be a whole thing with grabs and holds and dancing, and probably you'd have to be immune to crashing for it to work. And it's probably less of a good idea still than bringing a gun with 30 meters of range at least, but you know what? Giant robots and swords simply make sense as a combo. So let's imagine mixing in some gun kata John Wick kinda nonsense. It could have been a whole thing. As it stands, a melee weapon is just a weird kind of gun in the game. They can actually be very powerful, and I later ended up banning myself from using melee attacks for a certain reason we'll see further towards the end. Whether or not swords are too wacky, we have managed to get through to the next phase, entering the final part of the grand game loop. At the start of phase 3, each time it asks you if you want to heal or skip healing and take +1 hope instead. And I really don't understand this at all. I never interacted with the hope system knowingly. And as we go on to fight the boss of the map here, a giant enemy crab or some such thing, let me just say what I think hope is after playing the game, and you can tell me how wrong I am and whether it's my fault for being wrong. I guess we're diving back in. Let's make it a topic. Why is everything so hopeless? Hope is this secondary currency that increases the amount you heal if you camp, I think, and might do some other things here and there. Does it make pilots cheaper? That's plausible, isn't it? Maybe I never really built up enough hope for it to do anything, but I don't remember any point where you needed hope. Such were the last words of a successful pessimist. The main mystery that sets me off is that you're able to gain hope at the end of a map if you don't heal. However, not only is the main purpose of hope for making healing more effective, but when you progress to the next map, your hope resets permanently. So, in order to accept the option to increase your hope, you skip out on a heal, but then all that hope does is let you heal better in the 5 seconds between saying yes to that and then going into the boss fight. Like nothing else will happen in the game before you lose the hope you just gained. So, It must do something else, I claim to myself, but I've no evidence that it does. I feel I either missed some feature here, or maybe we've once again got crossed wires from the fact the game was redesigned after launch, and maybe there are some loose ends still sticking out of that mess. As for hope, to the limited extent it still exists as a mechanic in 2.0, here's my analogy for it. You can stay awake and hopeful, or go to sleep. But the best thing an awake person can hope for is a chance to go to sleep. So why offer the choice at all? I don't know why that's my analogy, but I wrote that down, so there you have it. I have many questions about hope in this game and in the universe in general. But in the meantime, we turn back to the game and ask, why am I fighting that thing from Final Fantasy VIII all of a sudden? Yes, this is our special battle for Phase 3 of the game loop. The red guys have these behemoth mobile fortress type robots that are so large and unwieldy they basically can't move or do anything, yet we've generously decided to close to point blank range to give it a chance against us. I was thinking a literal medieval trebuchet would be more effective than trying to bring our 50-meter range assault rifles in, even if they do have infinite ammo. There are several fights like this in the game, and they seem to be plucked from a slightly different design philosophy from everything else. Firstly, in boss battles, the boss will generously only target one of your mechs, and the game actively warns you which one it is, on top of the usual prediction system. So the strategy becomes to have the targeted guy stand in a blind spot, while the rest of the team just unloads everything at will. In this way, the bosses are effectively like a hand-holdy beginner version of the normal combat mechanics. You're kind of expecting the whole time like loads of ads to come in from the edges and do something to make it more complicated. But no, you can just unload turn after turn and just wear this thing down. So it's a welcome change of pace, I suppose. It just feels like an odd change of pace. Things do get harder when it becomes weaker, because the boss will activate this laser beam attack that can cover a wide area. You have to be careful to dance around it. In truth, the best place to be is right next to it, because its laser and main guns don't incline downwards, meaning you're safe once you're within like 20 meters of it. I was content to dance around with a long-range rocket launcher and marksman attacks though. It's something to do. We'll see a way more effective way to obliterate these bosses later on. For now, the job is done with surprising ease, and this is where the main game loop will be coming to a close, / its next beginning. The map has been liberated, all hope is lost as I mentioned, and the army will usually give you some resources as a reward, and if you're very lucky they might say thanks, but probably not. Instead, you'll be shipped off for same-day delivery to the next map and it all starts again. However, you do get some choice, and I distinctly remember being a little unhappy with this, strangely, so let me explain my reasoning. You're asked if you want to go to an optional map to get more resources and level up pilots before continuing. Having now done 2 maps, which took many hours, I wasn't happy to see the game hover this option over me because I thought, A, I guess I need to do it because I'm playing on hard difficulty for some reason, and B, I don't want to spend that much time not making progress given how long it took to do 2 maps. We're at 7 hours 5 minutes into the footage right now, and on the map I could clearly see there were like 10 times that many maps still ahead of me, like a lot of work is still to come. Little did I know you don't have to do loads of the maps, as I said before, and some maps are actually just really short, slightly different affairs as we'll see. But yes, at the time, I was just thinking, oh, I guess I have to really grind to get this footage. It lowered my morale, and got me thinking about how this game could pick up the pace, which will inform some of my rants yet to come. Anyway, I did decide to do the optional map because I hate myself, thinking that I will skip future optional maps, because the first one must be the most important one, positive feedback looping and such. Maybe I'll earn the upgrade that makes the base go faster, and hence avoid some disaster 20 hours later, and it will all be worth it. And pilot level ups are good too. We'll talk about my thoughts on the whole system there another time. Instead, it's time to move into my thoughts on the equipment screen. Between most missions, you have new equipment you could try out and various tooltips to look at, and I wanted to hit you with my list of 3 very loosely related points to do with equipment. Topic: Hyperworm's equipment stuff. First, just a little thing. When you're comparing your current weapon to a new one, the two relevant tooltips are shown on opposite sides of the screen, which is a bit annoying. I wonder if they were afraid of having the tooltips cover the image of the mech itself. But yeah, cover it. It totally doesn't matter at the moment the comparison is made. Just get all that stuff off the right edge of the screen. Thank you. Then slightly more annoying than this is that the all-important damage per attack stat on a weapon only appears after you wait for a while for the less useful damage per shot and damage per second stats to scroll away, both of those being largely irrelevant because you can't choose the shot count or duration of your attacks. So only the final number, just the damage overall, will factor into your gameplay decisions, combined with the number of attacks you can make per turn, which is what the little graph represents if you imagine it to be the timeline. I guess I don't see why I was shown the other information first, or even at all. I think this can be simplified to just attacks per second and damage per attack, leaving the other considerations aside. The next worm tells me that there is a secret to equipment that I only discovered by reading about it online at the end of my Phantom Brigade career. Each weapon is divided into one of 3 range classes, short, medium and long. Although this is a hard-coded distinction rather than being linked to the actual range. It's possible to learn this, but since actual range is what matters, I thought the only reason it was classified was that occasionally a pilot has a trait that's like 10% more damage with short-ranged weapons, meaning a short-range TM weapon, and it won't work with other weapons at short range, as I had hoped it would at one point. However, the actual secret is this. Each class receives the ability to score critical hits with a certain weapon class, and I don't think the game ever tells you this. That's my accusation. Critical hits are a half-forgotten mechanic in the game's presentation of itself, but they matter quite a lot, so I'll just hint for now that it turns out to be the only way to enable critical hits. It's to select a weapon of the correct range class for your pilot, e.g. engineers can only crit with medium-range TM weapons and nothing else. Defenders can never crit regardless of weapon choice, and I don't think it ever tells you this anywhere. It is partially hinted at when it describes the engineer class as being quote-unquote good with medium-range weapons, but that's actually a hard-coded enforced rule rather than some strategy recommendation, and I think that's impossible to discern without outside help. More on this later actually. My final equipment worm is something disappointing that seems very hard to fix. A lot of weapons can't really be used because they take too long to fire. There are lots of weapons in the game which you have to spend most of your turn firing, and that's a real problem because it means you have to not use cover, you have to not move, and you just have to take damage during that time. And since damage means potentially stopping on the campaign map and spending rare resources to fix, you're not quote-unquote supposed to heal. You need to do it the minimum possible amount. The incentive to use weapons with short firing times is overwhelmingly large, and that was a shame, I thought. It unbalances things, especially when pilot damage is considered, because even the beefiest mechs can still have the pilot shot out of them in a single turn if you're just standing there firing a heavy machine gun, which can only fire in 4-second bursts for some reason. Which brings me to what I want to ask for here. Let the attack length of any weapon be editable, same as a wait command length. Right now, an attack consists of a set number of shots, and you have to fire them all and get all the heat. But a more finessey approach is to let the shot count be your choice, so you really can min-max when and where to shoot during the turn. Then that damage per shots number they insist on telling you about would mean something in the game. The main worry there is just the amount of micro needed to input your turns would grow even more, and I'll ultimately argue that the amount of micro already present is a problem. However, there is a way to solve this and include a variable shot count approach by taking the game in a different direction, but more on that later. Here's a little thing that's worth saying somewhere in this commentary. This game's pretty cool, huh? yeah, I thought I might mention that once you finish making your masterpiece of a battle and you've dodged all the damage, got all the kills, it is a really cool and unique strategy experience to have done that. It just takes a really long time, not really put across here by all of my editing, and that's why in reality, it's not worth it half the time. There's the decision making where you see the situation and deduce what you should do, but then inputting the orders to do that has a load of trial and error and bouncing between your low and higher level menus, and it's also cool to manipulate the AI and get what you want to happen, like making them shoot into walls, making them shoot each other, making them get scared and bail out because you're looming too ominously. Which brings me to my next actual point to make, which is that there is some way to freak out the enemy and make them eject from their mechs. Which is amazing for you because it makes them waste a turn doing this for starters, which means fewer attack actions are needed to win, which gives you that positive feedback loop mechanism where one enemy ejecting means you land more hits on different enemies, making them more likely to eject, blah 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 blah, positive feedback loop. And the loot you get after a battle depends on whether the enemy mechs survived. So to really min-max what limited economy management there is in the game, you need to leave all of the enemy mechs intact, so you can take them apart and either scrap or use the best parts of them. The only question is, how do you actually get them to eject? And I never really worked this out, that's the grand point I'm getting to here. I think the only surefire way to do it is to shoot off all their weapons. But they might also eject, just if you give them some general damage taken, especially pilot damage. Shooting off weapons is a really fun idea, but did you know that you can't explicitly target parts of an enemy mech, despite them all having different health bars and shooting them does different things? Whoops! Almost opened a door with a Devon Hyperworm's black hole behind it. We're going to ignore this for now. That said, if I remember correctly, I think this salvage rule, where you have to leave the enemy's parts alive to salvage them, only applies on hard difficulty and up, which is a really good way to actually make the game different at higher difficulties, so kudos for that. I think difficulties mainly do more bullshit things than that though. We might take a closer look later when I started investigating such things in detail for a certain reason. In the meantime, well, we've got about 1 billion more fights to do. We've been through a game loop in this commentary now. So I gesture at the game and say, imagine what you saw already happens 7 or 8 times, but with a special final boss stage at the very end. That's different, and there's a sort of mid-boss in the game as well, we'll see soon. All the regions are quote-unquote the same, all the battles are quote-unquote the same, by which I mean differences do exist, of course. It's just not to any degree that someone not in the depths of the playing experience is likely to pick up on it or appreciate it. It's a game where you can do 2 things. There are 2 inputs you can make to the game. You can move, and you can attack the enemy. And that's true in battles and on the campaign map, so you'll never not want to be doing that, and you will never be doing anything else. That is the game. It's only that in battles, exactly how you decide to do it is actually fun and rewarding. Wait a second, games can work like this, can't they? And I can't really put across in the commentary without like a second-by-second live commentary on the thought process, like why that's fun. So I'm sort of like brushing over the good bit of the game in this commentary, unfortunately. I'll just say that I liked that thought process not shown here. I didn't like the input process though, as I keep saying, so eventually I came to make a compromise with the game in my head that did make me like the game overall, and I'll show you what I'm talking about there in a bit. Here's a look at the upgrade system. You can spend your precious currency units to get various small upgrades to your base. The most significant ones let you have more mechs and pilots, which is always handy, but grabbing more movement speed and faster camping and more repair slots, those are pretty good ones too. There are also upgrades that give you slightly more salvage capacity after battles, but they're so expensive that I was skeptical about them being a trap, essentially, that will never pay for itself. It's just a money dump, especially on hard, when you get much less salvage in battles anyway, and often no salvage at all. My overall 2 cents on the upgrades is that they're nice, but they don't seem very important, and they're not very gameplay-y. By which I mean, what I really want to see in a menu like this is being able to buy artillery or dropship deployments, like abilities that can be unlocked to use in battle. And those two examples I picked because they do exist in the code, because the enemy uses them on you. So they've come very close to being able to do this, but the player can't touch them. The biggest surprise about the unlocks, actually, is that going through the tree from the beginning, you can see it's possible to have up to 9 mechs and 9 pilots. And I thought, okay, we'll go for that, but you can only use 4 for whatever reason. And I had expected you to be able to deploy everything at first. I know it would be a real nightmare UX-wise, but still the classic tactics game, why is this limitation here question, from a non-game design standpoint, must be raised as always. The devs will say they can't make it work with 10 mechs on your side or it's not fun, and I say, from my high mountaintop, then you aren't good enough. And with a snap of my fingers, whoever insisted on having really long turn inputs that don't scale to large battles will turn to dust for committing that crime. And after all that ranting, I've made it to the end of the first optional map here. The boss stages for optional maps are essentially long, normal battles, and these are the best fights in the game, IMO. They're just long battles with loads of stuff going on, no gimmicks, just hard gameplay, pure and simple. While I have my fun out there, let's get away from gameplay and talk about something that quote-unquote needs to be brought up. Topic: the implication. I want to talk about the central premise of the game, that you can see 5 seconds into the future, and that you can stop and start time. I think only the former is actually addressed in the game. You have a machine that tells you everything that will happen for 5 seconds. But why time stops when you look at this data, I'm not sure. And that is essential to the operation of it, time stopping, because as you might have noticed, a machine that can see 5 seconds into the future isn't that useful if it takes more than 5 seconds to do anything with that information. So this machine only works in a world where you can literally stop time and review things for the next 10 minutes and then do something about it. And I guess we can, the plot just rolled over that part in the beginning. Really, the whole 5-second prediction thing is irrelevant. Just being able to stop time is an automatic victory machine, even if you couldn't predict the future. Because you can still plan infinitely and communicate instantly and such. Some will say it's like this because they wanted to make a turn-based tactics game, but they made the mistake of explaining the game's mechanics with an in-universe invention, and then forgot about the implication of it. The other implication, of course, is that you have this vague paradox arising from the determinism revealed by the machine. If the next 5 seconds are set in stone and can be completely calculated from the current state with a big computer, which is sort of possible in real life if the computer is so large it covers half the universe or whatever, but we'll ignore that. Just accepting they can do this. Can't I also use the machine on myself? As in, why am I giving orders when I have a machine that will perfectly predict what orders I'm going to give? How does this sync with the fact that I personally am still active in my decision making while time has stopped? Can the machine tell me everything I will do? When do I have agency to change the future that the machine is predicting? You can even tie this together by saying that the prediction machine perfectly predicts what you will do after having seen its predictions about the next 5 seconds, so it will just give all of your orders instantly in the first frame, and maybe we could then avoid time having to stop if it just predicts what you would have done had time actually stopped. And I don't know how this works out with, say, if the machine can only predict 5 seconds in the future, but does that work if time is stopped while it's predicting? So if time stops and I start calculating things for 10 hours and then come back and give my orders, because no time actually passed, we're technically still within the 5 seconds the machine can predict, so does that mean it can see everything that I thought of during those 10 hours from my perspective in which time from the machine's perspective wasn't moving at all? Something. It's probably better for the timeline if we can avoid a way to have time stop, and just say that the time stopping thing shown in the game is some kind of illusion in the player's mind caused by raw exposure to the determinism of the universe itself through this machine, and your brain is fighting against it in some way. Of course, This machine's existence obliterates the concept of free will once and for all, and I'm happy for it. I love determinism, it's so gosh darned neato and sensible. It's cause and effect all the way down and up, simple as that, and with enough info, you could theoretically determine any part of any causal chain anywhere. Again, ignoring the fact that gathering quote-unquote enough info is a literal god-tier endeavour. So actually, you can't really do any determinism. I can't predict anything. I have no idea what the average person will say to me when I say, hey, want to talk about an indie turn-based squad-based tactics game with giant robots and philosophical implications? Well, actually, I do know what they'll say to me, but that's a bad example. Determinism. It's not my fault I like it. Basically, if you showed me this gameplay concept and asked me to write a story for it, the war would be thrown into the back seat to favour a story about meddling with the universe state and the breakdown of the illusion of choice and how this impacts people's mental health and like society and religion. Maybe that's why everyone's so fatigued all the time. The damn machine basically implies your thoughts are meaningless and all predetermined. You're just trapped watching them play out in some philosopher's mad science experiment, which for the characters in this game is literally true. They're trapped in a game with a machine that lets them know they're trapped in a game. But we, outside the game, are we any better or just more complex? In conclusion, they could have just said, you can see 5 seconds into the future because of magic. Saying it's a computational technique has too many implications. Now let's continue listening to whatever rubbish I was predestined to say next. There is a secret Ludo resonance going on here because I, as the player, am very fatigued with the game by now, and this of course matches the endless fatigue problems of my crew. It's like how in Final Fantasy XIII, it could be said that it was deliberately frustrating in its design in how little freedom it gives to you, because being frustrated by a lack of freedom was the theme of the game. We're really reaching for the excuses here. My burnout on these long battles in Phantom Brigade is a sign of artistic genius, but I am now going to get a reprieve. It was a delight to find out that the next region can be done entirely with a single battle. This is another of the best battles in the game, where it's got some special thought put into it. You need to work your way up the deck of a cargo ship. A land cargo ship, that is, but let's not worry about that. And you have to take out the engines. The twist is that killing the engines slows the thing down and causes more enemy reinforcements to catch up to you. This leads to a second half, where a handful of long-range missile launcher vehicles are constantly bombarding you, and you have to really study the timeline to find the blind spots you need to advance. With the two additional considerations that many nooks and corners have enemy mechs standing there, and also the reward you get for this mission is based on how many containers survived. So while the different defiles the containers create make for loads of easy hiding places, you also want to not use them. I think I was ignoring this, having got to the point when I noticed that having currency and random equipment didn't usually help, because I didn't really need the upgrades and had no intention of using 90% of the equipment I'd found as per earlier rants. One thing that does help is that the enemies hidden in the stage don't aggro onto you until the turn after you discover them. So while you might round a corner and find an enemy, they won't fire at you until you've had time to move somewhere else, which is incredibly generous and incredibly game designy. Like you're avoiding guaranteed damage or surprise damage, which is a very player-focused, make sure they're having a good time style of game design. I think they've made the right call, but the masochist in me says, no, they should just let you die if you round the corner and walk into an enemy who's got their gun pointed at you. I don't know, I want to be punished, but then in that universe, in this commentary, I would be saying, that's bullshit, don't you know there's a game design rule where you can't surprise the player with damage? Look at how people hate Dark Souls, blah blah blah. It's because last night I was playing that part in Dark Souls where you have to run past the hollows to get to the bell gargoyles and they're just leaping at you and slashing at you, and because I had light armor you can die instantly from that. And I just thought, this is fine. This is a fun game, isn't it? And yeah, and I'm passing that trauma onto Phantom Brigade for no reason. It's fine, right, moving on. The other great thing about this mission is how good dashing is. Dashing more broadly is the best mechanic in this game. It's that purple blob on the timeline, and represents more of a jump than a dash, in that you can dash up and down heights. Dashing units are hard to target, so it's a good shout to dash if you can't avoid being fired upon. And dashing breaks the targeting of seeking missiles. Despite, yes, using rocket engines to jump, actually making you easier to target, it's kind of the opposite of how countermeasures usually work. You make yourself into the countermeasure with a massive flash of heat, and somehow that helps. Indeed, the game doesn't go in for countermeasures for whatever reason, meaning the only way to get missile locks off you is to jump 25 meters to the side. Maybe the targeting is very tunnel visioned. We're breaching the territory of a future rant, so let's stop here. Dashing is cool in this mission because you can jump along the top of the container maze to skip loads of movement. In fact, you can skip most of the mission if you really commit to this, as I will demonstrate later. That's because this is a do the objective type mission, where the end state doesn't matter at all. The game is inconsistent with this. Sometimes you win if you do the objective, other times you do it and then it says, oh, but we can't leave until we secure the area, and you have to go and kill all the enemies anyway, the generic gameplay. That's probably how it should always work, because we end up with situations like right here, where we end the mission with a rain of missiles coming down on us, probably some enemy mechs still alive at close range. You could just have the enemies eject or leave to have it be a tiny bit more immersive than just smash cutting out of the gameplay and saying, oh, you probably won. Anyway, that was a good mission, and it completes a whole region on its own, which renewed my hope that maybe I wasn't only 10% of the way through the game after all. Also, the screen where we pick the next region hints that you don't have to do all of the regions, since the one behind us isn't accessible. I don't know if I knew about that fully yet. I might have thought I had to do all of them, further lowering my morale. And on the flip side, if you do actually want to do all the regions, you can, but only later on. So they've done this correctly, basically, in my opinion, but I didn't think they were going to at first, so it's good to see that they are. As for the choice we have to make, there is a tad of non-linearity because you pick what route to take across the map, and different regions feature enemies with different types of equipment. So you can pick which ones you'd rather face, / which ones you want to salvage equipment from yourself. Here I went with the pilot damage region, not really knowing what that was, but I will very, very soon learn what I've done the hard way. The first mission here went okay, so while I see to that, let's pop open the next topic: hyperworms, weapon ranges. Why? Look, here I am once again, about to complain that the weapon ranges in a strategy game are too short. And I know why it has to be this way. I know that no one actually likes it when things have long range. We humans, we're a predatory species. We have tunnel vision. Wide vision is for prey species, okay? Games should be designed like you have a 4x3 480p monitor as God intended, and you can't really be trusted to move the mouse long distances. But Phantom Brigade is a game whose premise and world very much isn't designed around the real-world game design limitation of wanting all the stuff you click on to be close together. It's easy with swords, it's easy with throwing a fireball and whatnot, but when you bring out the assault rifle the size of a bus, attached to a mech the size of a building, and then tell me it does 0 damage from 60 meters out, it essentially reveals they wanted to make a turn-based tactics game in the traditional format, not this turn-based tactics game. Giant robots were selected as a theme, but they didn't want to make the game about a war between giant robots. They wanted to make XCOM, where you're also a giant robot. And those two worlds, those two subgenres, don't get to mix in any way. We're going to do 99% XCOM and that's final, and then there are just some giant robots on the screen. Doesn't really matter or impact anything. So you can shoot 60 meters because that's easy to portray, and the movement distance per turn can be short and easy to do pathfinding calculations for. It's all just straight up easier to design and play. I accept all of these excuses, they're pretty valid. But do I want my assault rifle the size of a bus to have 3,000 meters of effective range anyway? Yes, I do. I imagine, perhaps naively, that map design could become your range constraint, which will still permit short range and melee combat in a world where most weapons can range the whole size of the battle space. As in, you can't use your 3,000 meters range because you're in city streets and you're actually just shooting round corners at something that's like a block away, in a sort of breaching of a room in a human squad shooter type feel. My real super crazy gimme all the money hyper compromise is that you should have infinite range, but you have to shoot in first person. As in, for each mech you see their perspective for the 5 seconds, and you have to first person shoot the enemy with your weapon for 5 seconds of an on-rails shooter to plot out your turn. So its effective range is tied to your player skill instead, and of course it would get harder if you're moving. And the rails there are defined by what movement orders you gave in the overhead view. I think that's the most gamey answer to all of this. It becomes a little roller coaster shooting game. You'll probably find that engagements do take place at less than 100 meters in practice because that's the range that on-the-move snap shooting action is feasible at for the player, allowing you to drop the idea of range being a concern because it's now automatically enforced by the player being unable to do anything else. It's happening once again. This is the era when Devin stops saying in every video, "This would be better if it were a strategy game." Like, that's over. We're officially in the problem is that this is a strategy game era. The limitations of turn-based tactics squad shooters are pretty tight. You need to hybridize in another genre to do something cool, and giant robot shooters need to do cool things to make it make sense. Therefore, I will sit and wait for the universe to produce a Titanfall Phantom Brigade crossover game. In the meantime, I'll just have to wonder why my handgun the size of a battleship cannon has bullets that come to a dead halt after 20 meters, getting outranged by someone throwing a discus or shooting a ping pong ball out of... Well, let's just move on to a slightly related gameplay commentary point. Here we are in the middle of the next battle, and during a perfectly innocent looking turn, same as any other, with surely Devin's epic battle composition having our units dodge all damage while striking the enemy here and there, we learn that one pilot just got semi-killed, aka traumatized. Due to the camera insisting on looking at something else, we missed what caused this, but we can get the replay of course, and soon the picture is clear. Railguns. Railguns are a type of weapon whose special gimmick is they shoot through walls. This really twists up the whole rhythm of the game, because we've been checking out enemy attack plans and then moving to block line of sight. Now that's not enough, as railguns not only shoot through walls, they shoot through anything, and they can pierce, as I later found out, between 10 to 20 layers of scenery depending on the weapon's specifics. So it's not like one building is dangerous but 2 is safe. Basically the maximum amount of stuff that could possibly be within the effective range of the weapon, it will still pierce it. And yes, this footage is me finding that out the hard way. I tried to take a shot inside this bunker-like thing, putting a good 20 meters of concrete between shooter and target, and no dice, another pilot gets killed inside their mech. I'm not even completely certain how this is supposed to work, because in the description of railguns, it says that while they pierce scenery, their damage drops too. It appears that how this works is it massively reduces damage to armor, but not to pilots. I think the rationale here is that what pilot damage is, like, it doesn't mean the projectile pierced your armor and hit the pilot. That's the confusion I think I had most of the time with this game. I later learned that pilot damage, it used to be called concussion damage or something, and it still is in some places in the game actually. The idea was that railgun rounds lose all of their momentum by piercing 20 meters of concrete, but then they bonk really hard off your armor. It's not the piercing that kills you, it's the massive vibration or concussive force of it decelerating suddenly, sending a shockwave through the mech. This gives the pilots a concussion. In other words, the damage drop-off doesn't affect pilot damage very much, or enough I will claim, which basically negates the armor drop-off because losing the pilot and losing the mech are very much the same thing. My last hope was that if you could get the shooter to aim through the ground, as in the terrain, rather than props, that might stop the shot. And there was a chance to get above them here to force an angle through the ground. The result is instant death. That was my baptism by fire then. We've learned a thing or one about railguns. They just kill you. You've got to prioritize killing railgun mechs immediately, or they will just fire effectively unblockable shots. Although not undodgeable, you can still dash to avoid them. You can also move out of their range to negate their damage, which I did not know about at all, and this battle was where I discovered how range and damage actually work properly, and let's check out how that happened. I've got one mech left, and I can save it by falling back to an extraction point. As I do so, the enemy can absolutely unload on me with 3 mechs, including the railgun that happily blasts through the buildings and such. However, I'm not taking any damage. That's because all the enemies have weapons with pretty short, effective ranges. So while I do get hit a load, especially by the railgun which lands like 10 hits in the next sequence, I don't take any damage at all. Because while cover piercing drop-off doesn't stop pilot damage, distance damage drop-off does. Yes, the rails will pierce 20 meters of concrete, but they won't pierce 40 meters of air. Why is that? Well, that's just what you get for trying to play a traditional squad-based, turn-based tactics shooter that doesn't bend to meet its themes as previously ranted. But taking this knowledge on board, my retreat began moulding into a massive kiting project as I realised they couldn't really damage me. It finally clicked, the whole like you can just dodge all damage thing. Because my quote-unquote sniper rifle has a 100-meter effective range. I can occasionally land a hit on the enemy that does do damage as I flee. And because there's no time limit and there's unlimited ammo, in theory I can run away forever, and eventually my RNG will allow me to get hits on them at a distance, while their chance of damaging me remains at 0 just mathematically because of the damage drop-off. This is only really possible because I have a light mech and they are either heavy or have damaged legs. If you lose all leg armor, you move slower. You can't actually destroy legs, unfortunately, which you can with arms. But anyway, as I played this sequence, I realized something else that I suspected already, which is that playing the game with only one mech under your control feels better. And this became a big deal to me. I'm going to talk about this idea a lot for the remainder of this video. It was inspiring. Handling only a single mech's turn, and then seeing it play out right away, before you've started thinking about something else, about another mech's turn, feels like better feedback. Which means you're reducing the distance between your inputs and something happening in the world. That's what makes it more gamey, the golden comment. The strategy is still there. There's just kind of more of it, because you're in this continuous flow of programming the moves of a single entity. And it's easier to think about how each move affects what you'll do next turn, because you aren't also coordinating other things that change up the battlefield situation more each turn and makes each turn less predictable, even with a magic machine that can supposedly predict the future. The point is, it was really nice to kite and shoot over and over, taking many turns, and leaning more towards something that was a bit more real-time. And of course, it's pretty outrageous that I can even do this, but here we are. All opponents eventually gave up and ejected in sheer frustration. And we do win this battle. We even got a rare achievement because all enemies ejected, and that's pretty unlikely. And ejected enemies leave maximum salvage for you to pick stuff from. But the lack of cherry on top is that the railgun itself, the magical weapon, wasn't available to salvage because my sniper destroyed it during the battle. Speaking of the sniper, it's Work Experience, who is now promoted to full-time for her glorious solo carry right there. We don't have enough time to camp to heal up, however we can still piece together a team from other mechs and pilots to continue playing and win some time via this next battle. While I do that... Topic. This should have been a basketball game. Now what do I mean by that? Well, I actually mean what it literally means this time. I just mentioned how playing with one mech was pretty good, and I was going to talk about that more here. But before I got convinced that Phantom Brigade should be a solo experience, my early game should have been a type comment was that I was thinking about sports games, a very rare thing for a loser gamer to do. I claim the gaming world is very much split between the losers and the normies. The losers have this automatic cultural aversion to simulators of popular reality, normie software such as sports games. Turn-based tactics is right at the other end of the scale, being this horrible pit of nerdery. However, seeing the mechanics from Phantom Brigade, with the 5-second predictions and ultra-heavy micro of all quote-unquote players, made me think this would be a great way to play ice hockey or some such real-life game simulator. Not really playing as in fairly playing, but playing as in you are the god of lacrosse, and you can perfectly predict all events, allowing you to input crazy and high-finesse plays and then see them play out. Basically, you would always be expected to win, so you wouldn't really have the game design of a sports game. More like some kind of fantasy challenge that is kind of like a sport, like Pyre, I guess, but more like you're an actual basketball team. Yes, we've gone off the beaten path now. My request for Phantom Brigade 2 is that it's a game about managing a basketball team that has to journey through hell, beating increasingly insane basketball odds, and you achieve this with the Phantom Brigade stoppy-starty determinism stuff. You could even attach demon arms to yourself to fully import an equipment system from the nerd game world. It's all right there for the making. Later on, I stopped caring about this idea and I wanted to make some anime bullshit instead. But let this be my outstretched hand to the normal world. Everyone playing Football Manager, playing The Sims, and to a lesser extent playing Forklift Operator Simulator 2021. You're gamers. And it could even be said that people doing the things these games are based off, like ball management activities, they're gamers deep down inside too. The half-beast Bloodborne speedrunner and the Tour de France pack mule must shake hands in my new game design utopia. But I don't think many real-life games have interesting game design, because I'm a loser through and through. But I am willing to compromise and recognize that those games are actually vastly more popular than the things I think are good. It's an "am I so out of touch? Yes, I am. It's the losers who are wrong" moment. But I can see a bridge, a glorious turn-based tactics with simultaneous turns asymmetric sports game with body modification and a save-the-world plot. EA Games, I'm so available right now, bring me in, and FIFA Brigade will be the game to unify all gamers. I'll talk about what I actually ended up wanting as a more reasonable Phantom Brigade 2 concept later on. After the battle, we now have time to camp and restore some of our traumatized pilots to life and repair damaged mechs. All very good. But I will say it was a little disappointing how little this heals you, considering how much work you have to put in to do it. As in, it costs camp supplies, a rare resource that you normally get like 1 or 2 of per map, and it costs time, which means you have to work around that as I did here, and in the end, it heals pilots by so little that it might be less health than one hit can take off. I guess I wanted it to be just a full heal, given how annoying it is to get. And then having slight heals ticking away in the background when driving around might be good too, something like that. Then I'd be fine with battles being a bit more dynamic and less cheaty from the player's perspective, and of course I'd be more fine with taking pilot damage through 500 layers of walls. Another thing I realized I could do is prestige my pilots. I was deliberately using my lesser pilots so that the EXP didn't go to waste, because I already have some pilots at max level. Turns out you can reset their level to begin developing them again, only they retain one perk from their previous tree, and get an extra perk for being prestige that depends on class. Like Multivitamin here gets extra EXP for being prestige, something like that. A nice synergy to make leveling up again less inconvenient, but the other classes don't have that. But yes, you do lose out on most of your perks and abilities if you do this. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a good idea to do it in the non-optional regions or if a boss is coming up. Heading to the next battle, you can see I've learned a very particular lesson. Obliterate railgun users immediately. I focus my first turn on raining everything on one particular enemy, blowing them to smithereens before any wall hacking takes place. I overshot here, firing more than is required to take out that mech, and seeing that, I decided this is now a good time to talk about how damage works and the related UI. Topic: Hyperworms, damage stuff. It took me a while to realize what exactly is going on with damage in this game. This is partially related to my great and deep-seated confusion regarding that percentage shown on the UI being accuracy in my mind, but indeed it's a damage modifier, and the thing it modifies is the smaller number in white beside it. But there are two numbers in white, so what's the deal there? The answer to that leads me to the thing I didn't really like about how damage works, so let's see what the worms have to say on this matter. In short, the second number is the total health of the target. However, we must immediately qualify that by saying that the concept of total health doesn't really exist in this game. So this number doesn't factor into any calculations you can make or anything like that. What they've done is add up the armor value of every part of the mech and then call that its overall health. Integrity it's actually called, but yes, it's health broadly speaking. It's a binary health system, meaning 1 HP and 1 billion HP are the same state. Only 0 causes something to happen. The opposite is something like Advanced Wars, where you have your health modify your other stats, which makes more sense, but it's a more punishing way of doing it. Certainly something to consider putting on our Phantom Brigade wishlist though. You shoot a bit less accurately if your arms are at half health, you move a bit slower if your legs are at half health, things like that. The twist is that a mech is considered dead if its torso integrity is 0, and that's the thing you really need to know, but what you really need to know is the integrity of the part that the shot you are taking, that the UI is referring to, is going to hit, and that's the wormy bit here. When you shoot, the direction of the shot changes which enemy health bar it applies to. Sides for arms, front for torso, back for legs. I think there's still a chance that a shot from any direction can affect any part of the mech, but I want to pretend that's not the case for my sanity's sake. That means my problem is that when it says for your damage calculation 500/2000 for example, it means your attack will do 500 damage against a thing with 2000 health, but you also might kill it in one hit. It might cause a crash. It might cause a weapon loss and ejection, which is equivalent to killing something. It depends on something the game should actually be able to tell you about. It can see that your shots are hitting the back and should be able to tell you that 500 damage is applied to the legs, and instead say 500/400 legs. Or go even further and have little tick icons to say yes, this shot might crash them. Might because there is still RNG accuracy and range considerations. I want a link between what it's saying and the gameplay events it's trying to tell me about. The other idea this raises is whether you should be able to pick your part target and have that be a tactical decision. They obviously deliberately didn't want you to do this, it's quite common to have this be a system and they didn't take that option, but that doesn't mean it has to make any sense that they chose that. As in, the combat's all at close range, you're using mechanically augmented means of attacking, the idea of attacking something's arm, remembering that by arm I mean a thing the size of a small vehicle, at 50-meter range, seems quite reasonable to ask, and you could do something with that, you could make a game out of that .wav. But I wonder if the developers would say, well, that will be overpowered effectively because you can just destroy the enemy's arms or legs really quickly. And this reveals why mechs aren't a good idea from a military design standpoint. It's kind of like it would be too tactical if you could pick which part to try and damage. So we only get this tends to hit X part system based on direction that doesn't necessarily make sense. Like, why does shooting in the back damage the legs? Like, can't I say no, please shoot the torso's rear armor and kill the pilot, something like that. And I'm pretty sure legs are also visible at the same cross-sectional area from the front. I don't know how reality works. There's two directions here you can take. One is to simplify it and just have a health bar. Then the current UI would be fine. And you just say, if you take a certain amount of damage in one turn, that crashes you or causes a weapon to drop off. Maybe it could be random. Or you can have the damage UI show the health of the thing you are de facto targeting, really, so that the information is more useful to you and you can do something with it. I guess that's what I really wanted here. You can do this yourself, but I want it to be there on the UI. That's the tiny little like brainworm style change I want, where actually I'm making a big show and dance over not very much, but I think it would make a big difference if you made that minor change. Don't be afraid when you see a mech walk up with 15,000 integrity in the end game, as does happen, because broadly speaking, everything dies after taking about 1/3 of that amount in damage, unless you outflank them and dance around while blasting from all directions, in which case you are punished by the enemy effectively having more health because the damage will be spread between systems, where your damage to them only matters if you get it to 0 in the end because of the binary health system. Wow, something or several things aren't quite right about damage / maybe just the UI for damage. And the game goes on. Here's another fight, where I wanted to highlight that you can eject your pilots to avoid trouble. Railgun nonsense aside, you can usually see if you're about to die. And here I had a mech's legs destroyed, causing a crash, meaning the mech is lying on the floor in front of the enemy, who are indeed going to keep shooting at it, so I can save the pilot with an eject order. Pretty handy. I think that's the only time I did this. All other mech losses were by surprise so far, and I think after this mission my huge gamer brain ended up avoiding sticky situations well enough. The other crashing related point to make here is we've got a prediction that the enemy will run into one of my mechs, and I choose to stand still and let it happen, because crashing is based less on momentum and more on weight. So if a light mech runs into a medium mech, as we have here, the light one will fall, meaning I can cancel the enemy's turn if I let them crash into me, although I do believe it damages you to do this, so bringing a heavy mech in and just crashing all the time isn't necessarily a good idea, although I did try that out, as you might have seen in some of the B-roll a few minutes back. At the end, you can see an example of the sort of strange tactics you need to avoid fully killing the enemy for salvage purposes. This is the sort of situation which I call messy game design, where I'm not pressing my advantage, not playing as I'm supposed to, because your shooters will keep shooting at something after it's disabled. You can't try to disable something explicitly. This adds to the frustration with the lack of clarity about which parts you're firing at any given second. So here we took out the pilot, but had I given full combat orders and taken this situation more seriously, more normally, the other mechs would then pile shots into the downed mech and destroy all the salvage. You don't have a shoot at hostile targets kind of behavior which you might expect, where your mechs will save heat and energy if they don't need to fire at their target once the order comes up, which would be a very nice feature, and make your guys look a bit more intelligent too, as in I want my guys to detect if they don't have line of sight to the enemy, to detect if the enemy's already dead, and not just shoot anyway. The brain-dead AI can do that because they're the AI, but I want my side to be a little bit better than that. That's what I'm asking for here. Or you could just give more information about how damage works, so you can know how many attacks you want to make probably to disable a mech. Rant. We did get a railgun this time, so we can play with wall hacking soon enough. There's an example right here, in fact, where the enemy can be made to just blast into a building because they don't know they don't have line of sight for some reason, whereas I'm shooting through the building and doing damage back to them, and shooting through it doesn't cause holes for them to shoot back at me, because of the reason. It's about as unfair when you use it as when the enemy uses it, so that's good, I guess. It's so effective that it's a problem, as in making the cover and line of sight mechanics just not even come up. It's like, well, but that's all the game had, so if you remove that, then the map doesn't quote-unquote do anything anymore. Your only consideration becomes range. So we might as well just stand in lines and have a line battle. I don't know, the wall banging and the way pilot damage works differently to regular damage, which also overrides regular damage because pilot damage is enough to kill a mech. It seems like something's a bit wrong, the kind of wrong that's making my decisions less important, making many/most weapon choices useless. It's limiting the gameplay here. It's an imbalance that really does matter even in a PvE setting. Moving on, there was a brief destruction battle where I pretty much fired from the spawn point while just moving straight to the extraction point, and that was enough to complete it. You're always aided in these missions by the enemy AI, who will just be inside the base, firing at you mindlessly, destroying the inner and outer sections of the base along the way for you. Although your EXP gain in missions is partially based on enemies killed, so just quickly getting through a mission without killing enemies isn't really the best. After that, it's boss time for the current region, and once again we face a giant enemy spider, with 4 legs, sad face. It's an upgraded version of the previous one, although mechanically it's the same deal. It tells you where and when it's going to hit, try not to be there, and you'll be okay. The only issue is that it's powerful enough to gradually make massive holes in buildings, and shots can go through those and take you by surprise. But here is where I encountered an important problem. The region was saved, the menu comes up being like, right, next region, maybe we're halfway to the end, and I just thought, no. The reason is that while I was enjoying bits of the gameplay, it was taking so long to input and just all the rubbish I gestured at before, I didn't think playing was worth it. And the prospect of clearing more regions was not interesting at all. It's actually another special region, the next one, although I didn't realise that. But yeah, there are 2 or 3 more regular regions you have to do to get to the scripted ending missions, and I was totally done. This was about 17, 18 hours in. And that was about as far as these mechanics could get the game, as far as I was concerned. I wasn't really interested in doing it again or anymore. However, I already hinted at an improvement I was thinking of, and so what I decided to do was experiment with my idea to see if I had any more fun along the lines I was secretly plotting. Step 1 is change the difficulty to easy. The game does an amazing job of telling you what the difficulty levels do, and it's all fully customizable too, which is a very good sign indeed. The biggest thing it does is give you more damage, and you take less damage, which is going to be handy for the next part of my plan, the 1 mech challenge. But while we're here actually, mini topic, I think there are too many difficulty options because while I normally say more equals better, so many of them here push the same things from different directions that I think it's hard to really guess what the outcome will be. I think this is a game where just altering damage output is enough to define the difficulty on its own, because more damage dealt means less damage taken, it means more resources, it means less heat needed, means you're less likely to lose pilots. Basically it means all the other things that you can ask for separately on that menu. And I'm imagining a simpler world with one massive damage slider at the top, giving an easier to balance official difficulty level paradigm, and everything else is just there for customizing your difficulty or doing something weird. There's probably a whole topic in me here, but let's push on, because I've got a better one in a sec. My new rule for this campaign is I can only deploy 1 mech to every fight, with the main goal being that the turns will cycle faster because I'm plotting less, reducing that time from plan to fruition, from saying shoot here to the shooting occurring, trying to engage that ethereal quality of making the game more gamey. Now this works. It really works. This is my "they shoulda done XYZ" comment from now on. Topic: they shoulda done made this thing about 1 mech. This new conclusion is not what I imagined I would say at first, because early on I was annoyed the game limits you to 4 mechs, and I wanted more. It brings to mind the XCOM remake series, where the limitation that you can only have like 4 or 6 soldiers, whatever it is, was so suffocating and so unjustified, and mods would always increase the soldier count. Gamers are gagging for bigger .mp3. But there your turns are immediate, so having more soldiers just means you get more turns basically. Here, the more agents you control, the longer it will be until any input you make does something, the more information you have to pass to make decisions, and the more you get the sense that the several minutes of time you spend inputting things just to see 5 seconds of action was itself the suffocating element. In both XCOM and Phantom Brigade, the cry is, I just want to play the game, and in XCOM that means giving you more inputs that go off right away. In Phantom Brigade it means giving you fewer inputs, so they are allowed to go off closer to right away. having thus convinced myself that it's not sacrilegious to suggest a squad-based tactics shooter have smaller squads, I can get to enjoying the fact that when the turns are close together, and all the battles feel filled with action, with constant shooting and dodging, because it's all about this one mech, everything shoots at you, you have to shoot at everything, and you're dancing around, blasting like in an anime, things get fun. They get really fun. Although, this is only because of the difficulty changes, and this is what quickly became clear, perhaps even overriding my belief that short input to execution times was the fun thing. It's fun with one mech to jump in, shoot, and see the enemy die when you shoot them. It's fulfilling the world should be impacted by all of the player's inputs rule, which our Lord and Saviour Gaben preaches as the source of fun in video games. It was something like that anyway. Maybe a priest can clarify the canon here. I think the main point of this topic is to say that reducing your party strength by 75%, but individual strength goes up by 50% or whatever easy mode actually does, makes the game faster, funner, feedbackier, and more tactics-er, more strategy-ish, while still being a high-octane, anime bullshit, giant robot ballet dance about blowing up other giant robots. Thanks to you, the know-it-all strategist controlling everything. It's the Code Geass we have at home type game, and yes, that's something I have to admit as well, really. I wanted this game to be Code Geass. I wanted this game to be Full Metal Panic, if anyone knows that one, and switching to solo mode is probably the best way to make this simultaneous turns thing have enough actions and heroics to make that work. And if you don't know what I mean by that, don't worry, you're unsullied, little head. This game's mechanics are the anime of turn-based tactics shooters, and you can take your giant robot with guns degeneracy much further here, and there exist many blueprints already on how that might take shape. Something. Despite saying I was tired with the game, I played it from the beginning again, only this time I had way more fun. And I wasn't done with starting again either, because we can go further down this new path I've stumbled into. Here in the ending stage of the first optional area, I was really getting into this. One thing that easy difficulty does is make heat dissipate faster, which allows you to do things like dash over and over and juke around and shoot quite a lot, making solo runs more viable and making the action more anime hero mech in style, and that's what I began to appreciate most. I'm gradually realizing that I don't want the limitations on how much I can move or shoot outside of the time limit or terrain. That's already enough of a limitation. If it's too easy to be able to shoot a lot, then add more enemies. That's basically what I'm going for here. Divide your power by 4, so I'm always vastly outnumbered, but then you can move and shoot freely. It's very plausible to find a somewhat safe route through the madness, even with a single mech, and still have time to ice all the enemies. This was fun. Good old-fashioned, no foolin' fun. And my big point for this part of the video is just going to be that I preferred this style of gameplay, and I think it should be explored more seriously. Here's a look at one of the ultra-rare, non-map clearing missions. This is what happens when you fight a patrol-type enemy group on the map. You have to defend your base vehicle against a swarm of drones that gradually fly in. Although there are also loads of enemies around to complicate matters. At first I thought it would be difficult, until it turned out you don't need to kill the enemies. The drones will come ahead of them, so they can be fought on their own and they're easy to kill. Having only one shooter does make it dangerous, because I might not have time to shoot at all of them, let alone the heat capacity, but it was fine in the end as it turned out, so there you go. Just an example of something a little different, defending a point against a rare enemy type. There's so much scope for more things like this. For example, speaking of scope, you could have something where there are 10 snipers in a tower and you have to knock it down without getting shot too much. I don't know. Use what the game has to make more game. Because the normal mixed squad battles are absolutely choking this game with how many of them there are and how similar they are to each other. I know people secretly like this. I know people play like XCOM Long War because they want to play the same 40 minutes of turn-based squad shooter 200 times in a row. But personally, I was ready to drop this game until I realised that we can animify this action and make it more engaging for my rotten, brought up by the internet brain. Doing the carrier mission again here, I wanted to see if the hidden enemies are always in the same place, and it seems that they are. You can in theory set up an attack ground order to shoot them during the turn they are revealed or before they're revealed. However, I got the position wrong. But yes, there is some exploity potential here. The main thing to do in this mission is to play the objective and ignore the enemies, because they won't use dashes to traverse the map very well, so you can get ahead of all of them and just take out the engines, then benefiting from the old "the end state doesn't matter" situation, where you win no matter how many missiles are screaming down on you when the conditions are met. Now, while I catch up through the rest of the game, topic: heat versus ammo. Following on from my liberation of easy difficulty letting you shoot more and this making more game out of the game in my view, we need to call into question the heat system in general. At first you might ask, why not use ammo? But this is a situation where you kind of have an excuse to not have an ammo system, because the battles in the game are technically so short with so few shots fired that it's plausible enough to say you never even used up your first magazine most of the time. So let's just ignore ammo or reloading. The only problem is that someone probably thought it would be too shallow to always be able to shoot, so we needed a mechanic to force players to work around being only able to shoot at certain times, a limitation from which the creativity of your movement choices can then bloom. That's the idea. I see the logic, although I'm going to argue it's not a good idea or a necessary idea as we go on with this video. The need also arises from the desire that battles be between matched opponents, that is, the enemy mechs work by the same rules that you do, ignoring the timey-wimey stuff of course. That means if you want to have numerically superior opponents, you need them to not shoot at you very much, so the player has a chance. And that means you need weapons to be pretty useless if whatever restrictions apply to the AI will also apply to the player. Hence, we come to the world where an assault rifle overheats if you fire it 10 times over the course of 5 seconds, which when combined with the rounds only travelling 60 meters, makes you wonder how we've managed to engineer a new type of gun that converts all of the chemical energy into waste heat and barely any kinetic energy. I guess all our engineers were working on the ability to stop time, so we didn't have many people trying to make better gunpowder, and maybe that's a fair priority system. I guess the number one complaint I have about the heat system is that it's lame. I see the need for it, and then I reject the need for it, because to me, the game doesn't need to be symmetrical at all. Just say, the Phantom Brigade mechs can always shoot, and the enemy can't because whatever. You know, like they did with the time mechanics. The challenge shouldn't be working out how to manage heat. It should be how to manage the sheer number of targets and threats you have. That's enough. It does the same thing, and it's more cool, it's more interesting, IMO, to be dancing around shooting whenever you have a sliver of an opening. Yes, this is the flashing lights go boom boom caveman brain talking, but does that mean it's wrong? Interestingly, you can actually decrease the amount of heat weapons generate in the menu to experiment with this, and I certainly will later in this video. The thing is, it decreases it across the board. So if you set heat generation to like 10% or something, the enemy will never stop firing at you and you get pinned down. I want heat cheats for me and not for thee, basically. So yes, this also means when you play on easy mode, as I am here, which sets heat generated to like 80%, something like that, the enemy actually shoots at you more than on normal or hard, counterintuitively. But then it does 75% of the damage, so technically it's still easier, maybe something. Immersion-wise, cool-wise, I think ammo and reloading should be the limitation and not heat. That's my surface level take here. Or failing that, scrap the idea of a limitation entirely, because target availability and safety to leave cover are themselves limitations doing the exact same thing, to force you to puzzle out when to fire. Multiple mechanics doing the same thing in the game design equals messy. The off-ED, quasi-religious game design creed is here again. I just consulted the village's turn-based tactics shaman, and they said, "More boom, more good." And I can't argue with that. After getting back to where I was, I discovered that actually the next region isn't another battle grind, it's only 2 special missions. Essentially, the easiest and most flippant thing I can say about this game is that more of it needs to be like this, because the open world type regions are just sequences of less interesting missions. There isn't really any gameplay coming from the open world side of it. You might as well remove the map from the game and just have it play like Ace Combat, just have missions that you do one after the other. And then with all the money you saved, let's have more mechanics instead. I know I'm asking for them to start again, but maybe they can go back in time, something, check the replay. I also want to secretly ask for them to massively expand that core gameplay so that I think it's good, where we essentially turn this into a giant robot version of Phantom Brigade, where the open world part of the gameplay and the strategic choices really is the game. That's the 10 out of 10 route, but I sense there being a cheaper 8 out of 10 route, where you just focus on the mission design instead. And I think you could cut a lot of stuff to allocate resources to that in your game dev tycoon style management system, which I presume real game devs actually do. Anyway, this next mission requires that you take out a radar array, or something, to damage enemy comms before your next move. And this turned out to be slightly less interesting than I first thought. By that I mean I thought that destroying the array would be the only thing you needed to do, in which case you can use the AI's willingness to fire at you when it doesn't have line of sight to your advantage, because they will absolutely destroy the array themselves if you stand behind it. I kind of thought that was what the game was trying to test you on, like whether you'd got that lesson learned by now. And while this does work, when the array is down, it just asks you to kill the enemies anyway, and this turns into another ordinary mission. So it's actually faster and safer to just go and kill the enemies first, do the normal mission, and then stand there firing at the array for a few turns. I guess I wanted them to lean into this idea that I imagined the mission could be about forcing friendly fire on the thing that you can't damage or something like that. Have the enemy possess overwhelming firepower so you can't kill them, like there's static emplacements everywhere with massive range and power, and it becomes more of a movement puzzle to guide enemy munitions into the otherwise indestructible thing. It's a gameplay activity you could do with the game's mechanics. In other words, what the game is now is 2 things. You can move and you can shoot. Well, most of the game is about shooting. You could make a stage that's only about moving and do something with that. That's another option. If you could complete a region by just doing a few movement puzzles, or like dodging through sniper galleries and yes, forcing the enemy to shoot themselves to kill themselves, we'd have a better game that more heavily utilizes all the work they've done already, IMO. Try not to be confused, by the way, that I'm complaining that the game is too repetitive and long, while also voluntarily playing the whole game twice for fun. You might detect a Ludo rant dissonance here, like I clearly don't believe what I'm saying, right? Well, all I'm going to say is that this dissonance is going to get worse, I assure you, so I might as well address this point later. Doing all of that unlocked the next boss mission, where we once again have to defeat a giant thing. But they have it twisted up this time, or twisted down I guess you could say, because while this looks like a boss stage, it turns out you just have to kill all of the ordinary enemies to win, so really it's a normal battle, but on a more interesting map than usual. Here we have the one and I think only instance where you can shoot a thing to open up a new route. This could be all over the game in principle, where you do enough damage to something to open up an impassable route, or get a new flanking move, trigger some special effect. As in, you shoot a truck full of bananas, and it spreads a zone of banana skins on the floor that makes the enemies slip. Again, this is something you can do with the existing mechanics. It's some literal low-hanging fruit there, so let's have some more interaction with the world, like in this mission. Doesn't have to be bananas, but it does have to be something other than shooting at the enemy. Now, since this stage was a little challenging to play solo, since the boss just sits there in the hole shooting you constantly, you have to be careful about where you move, or you can run away, as I did. This is where I started to get a bit miffed with the railguns. I realised how good they were and how that was a problem. I can sit at this lower elevation, out of everything's sight, but I can still shoot at all the enemies on the higher level because railguns work on this layers system where you can shoot through whatever it is, 20 layers of stuff. What counts as a layer, I don't know. Maybe a wall counts as one, or the ground as a whole counts as one. Basically, I'm shooting through approximately 100 meters of reinforced concrete, foundations, mud, then the bonk on the enemy armor at the end is gradually concussioning the pilots into oblivion. So this map's design makes it quite easy to grind down the enemy for free by just hanging out back here. Railguns? No. This mission planted the seed that grew into my no railguns personal rule that will come in a bit later. Eventually, I need to go and do the mission, which is, drumroll please, destroy the 3 things. There are 3 things, and killing them kills the boss. And no, you can't quickly kill the things and skip the rest of the mission, because you do also have to kill all the enemies, the same anti-twist as in the previous interesting mission. I think it was only that carrier mission with the containers that lets you really play the objective. And while I complain about it not making sense, it is more gamey, it's more puzzly to think, how can I do X and only X as fast as possible? Valkyria Chronicles vibes here. I'm up for having more you win no matter the battlefield state type mission endings, if only so I can complain about them. By the way, this is really fun, what I'm doing here and complaining about. Playing the game solo is really good. I just wanted an Armored Core game from a top-down perspective. I think that's all this is for me. Dancing around and blasting the enemies is fun, and doing it solo compresses the action in your brain and into your hands. I guess that's the best way of putting it. Shooting through walls makes it all very viable to an outrageous degree actually, so we're going to have to stop doing that to give the enemy a fair chance at some point. Now after this mission, I wanted to experiment with other weapons, and this is probably as good a time as any for a rant on something I otherwise have basically no footage for. Topic: the weapon manufacturing / customization part of the game doesn't seem to do anything. This game has a quite deep equipment system, with weapons having loads of traits and random perks, and even the same weapon of the same level will have different damage, fire rate, heat buildup, all that stuff. And there are way more weapons and weapon types in the game than I thought. Yes, most of them are just guns, but there are loads of them. They come with all sorts of variants, like you have the normal shotguns, the pilot damage shotguns, the rapid fire shotguns, the instability damage shotguns that make enemies crash more, and of course the rail shotguns, which don't recognize the laws of physics. Those are handy. Each variant has a level and then perks that are randomly acquired over time, and that's just the shotguns. You get 1,000 times more weapons than you can use, even on hard difficulty with its harsher salvage rules. I was swimming in random stuff. What you're supposed to do is take this into the workshop screen. Here you can scrap things from your inventory to unlock blueprints. Then you can manufacture those things from your workshop. Okay, but why would I ever do that? That's what I don't understand. Let me walk you through this and maybe my confusion will become clear. Let's say you want to make an assault rifle that does pilot damage. First, you go to your inventory and you scrap a few examples of that specific rifle design to unlock the blueprint for it. So first I need to have 3 assault rifles that do pilot damage. We get rid of them. Now I'm allowed to craft assault rifles that do pilot damage. Then we need to scrap the uncommon version of it and then the rare version of this assault rifle that does pilot damage 2 or 3 times to get the ability to craft higher stat variants of these weapons, i.e. the ones you're trying to get and need to use. You do that and then you'll be able to buy this assault rifle from the workshop by spending components. But did you notice something? In order to buy this weapon I want, I had to throw away 6 to 9 copies of that same weapon. Granted, I can buy as many as I want now, but do I want more than 6 to 9? I probably want 1. But the twist is weapon level. Weapon level massively matters for stats, more than anything else in the game, but the workshop itself has to be leveled up to increase weapon levels, and you do this by scrapping weapons of the next level. As in, to get to level 5 workshop to level 6, you need to scrap 6 level 6 weapons, 12 level 6 mech parts, something like that. You throw out most of the best equipment you have to be able to make something that's equivalent to that best equipment that you currently have or had. To be as clear as Obama, 6 weapons and 12 mech parts at the current level of the game is enough to have your whole squad be fully equipped at the current level. So what it's asking is for you to scrap all of that gear to unlock the ability to make one part at that level, and you have to pay for it, and you also have to scrap enough of a specific part before you have the blueprint for it. So you might not even be able to buy whatever it is you need, even if you can pay for it. So there is one use case I can detect here for this whole screen, this whole mechanic, which is if you really want a level 9 sniper rifle, but all you have are loads of level 9 legs and arms and assault rifles and rocket launchers and pistols. You can scrap all of that to make the workshop level 9, but then maybe you also have loads of level 2 or 3 sniper rifles you can scrap to unlock the blueprints for the various kinds of rifle. Then altogether you'll be allowed to buy a level 9 rifle, something you didn't already have, from the workshop. If you want level 5 legs, but you don't have them, the only way to get them is to scrap a bunch of level 5 everything else. But how do you get the level 5 everything else? Well, it just drops from level 5 enemies. They also drop level 5 legs. So there's just this Ouroboros crafting system thing where like everything's made of itself and you don't need any of it. It just doesn't do anything. This isn't really unheard of, but usually the thing you would do to make this unique and better would be like, if you scrap 3 level 5 legs, it gives you the custom Uber level 5 legs that overperform, like they're better than the things you get from the game, but all you can do is make things that are the same as what you get from the game normally. Somebody tell me where this whole system fits in. What are you supposed to do with it? Like, I always had everything I ever needed by accident, so what does all this other stuff do? I think I'm going to stop rocking backwards and forwards now, thinking about level 5 legs. Just somebody explain it. What did I miss? I tried a mission with a giant laser, as we can see, and it's nice because it also shoots through cover by virtue of destroying it. However, it costs almost your whole turn to fire it, and you can't unfire it or move around very much while you're firing it, so it kind of sucks for solo play, and for any play where the enemy might fire at you really. There is a way to make it more useful, which I will show you later, but it does require cheating. Now it's probably about time I start the game again, right? Yes, for all my complaints about hating how repetitive this thing is, I literally started again. Why? To play with the difficulty settings. First, I installed some kind of hardcore mod to make the game harder, and we'll see what that does in a bit. I also got a mod that gives you more options for making a custom difficulty level. I wanted something that took the normal economy and then twisted it for an action-packed solo challenge. So basically I've got heat generation way down so I can shoot a lot, damage way up so I can do the damage of 3 mechs with 1, but I also avoided reducing incoming damage to keep that dance of always avoiding attacks from my original run. This is where I discovered that thing I mentioned before about heat generation affecting the enemy. If you turn it down, you're going to get shot at constantly, and avoiding damage becomes really difficult if you want to try and make attacks ever. Plus, the hardcore mod I installed, what it essentially did is add like 10 new enemies to every stage. And when you're solo, you need to really only ever be in range of like 1 to 3 enemies max, or you'll just have no chance of playing at all. It went okay, and having loads of enemies across the map forces you to play really hard to hit isolated enemies towards the edge and jump around all over the place, but I gave up somewhere in the first zone when I foresaw how things were going to get bogged down. I returned next without the hardcore mod, and with a new difficulty setup that essentially takes the economy and campaign gameplay of hard mode, but gives the damage reduction of easy mode, and a massive boost to player damage, so you're going to 1 to 2 tap most enemies. We're effectively concentrating the damage of the squad into 1 mech, so in a very vague way the game should be balanced now as a solo experience. It ended up actually being easier than expected and forcing me to bring in new bands, but in the meantime, we can at least get a montage of our cool anime robot soloing half the game again as I once again have to race back to where I was before. Topic: the sci-fi bullshit they should have pulled out to make all of this more plausible. And by all of this in that topic title, I mean the fact that weapons are so spectacularly weak and/or armor is so spectacularly strong. And this latter point leads me right to what I wanted to say. We needed to throw in a lore conceit that mechs are made of some super special material, which you already need to do anyway to make them feasible as works of engineering, but I digress yet further. What I wanted them to do was distinguish between units that are made of unobtainium and regular units. So for example, the game has tanks, and I think the tanks you see should have 3-kilometer ranges and generally operate like normal tanks to ground our world's military rules. In return, you can kill them yourselves from any range because your weapons are clearly comparable in caliber, size, accuracy, what have you. But wait, the developers scream, I wanted to make a squad shooter with 40-meter engagement ranges so I can play it on my pitiful monitor without having to implement camera zoom niceties. But I've still got you here because we simply say that unobtainium is so ridiculously strong that it caused a military paradigm shift, and realistically only point-blank range shots have any chance of damaging an unobtainium vehicle. And that's the simple reason why effective ranges are short. The shots are still deadly, but they do nothing to unobtainium. This gives you a built-in, the war was about control of unobtainium plot point for your wider lore as well. And there you have it, we've got a lore excuse for the gameplay. But it's important, I think, to still have those regular units that die at any range to demonstrate this paradigm mechanically. The difference is what matters. Plus, that's more combat tactics variety for your combat tactics game, and you don't really have to do anything like development-wise to achieve this. Tanks could fire EMP shells or smoke, just annoying things, perhaps in a really narrow arc at any range. So they are a threat to you, sort of, but in return, your assault rifle, the size of a small tank unto itself, can probably just take them out with a glancing blow at any range. Again, perhaps I'm channeling Armored Core here, where there's a lot of small fry you can just kill without even thinking about it that theoretically are a problem to you. And then you sort of do that just to tread water until you get to the real fights against difficult things, enemy mechs for example. A similar rhythm could exist here, and we can justify it with the lore, so that's all very nice. If they insist on keeping all engagement ranges down, you can always go the Dune route, where you pull the old switcheroo of saying that defensive technology only works against small high-velocity things, and it's weak against weak strikes at close range, or whatever it was that made them able to put sword fights in a world where every kind of weapon system you can imagine and more also exists. Although that is only the second most famous instance of that lore conceit, because also Godless Tactics does this. Godless Tactics did it first. Some are saying, many people are saying this, give the mechs plot armor and the game will make more sense. A bullshit-based ludonarrative resonance is achieved. That is my claim. During that rampage through the game, the thing that got banned was the axe. The problem with my setup is that having triple damage means most pilot damage weapons kill pilots in one hit without having to pay attention to the mech, and the axe did something like 40 to 60 pilot damage per hit, and most pilots have 20 to 25 health. There was still a mystery where sometimes the axe didn't apply pilot damage, and I think secretly there's some kind of concussion defense stat that mechs have but the game doesn't show. Maybe it was in an old version of the game and got half patched out, because I think I saw people talking about something like that happening. There's something that sometimes means your pilot damage is massively reduced, and the 40 damage axe needs swipe after swipe to get the damage through. It might be something falling through the cracks of the fact that this game is a 2.0 state. It's in a 2.0 state, as in it was completely rebalanced post-launch, and I'll talk about that at the end. So I banned using axes, but I found that simply using an assault rifle is the best option for everything. It's got long range, high damage, no weaknesses, so I started simply gunning through the game with reckless abandon. Another mod change I added was the ability to queue up attacks and dashes on top of each other, as in letting you dash while shooting, which normally isn't allowed. Although it doesn't work very well. Basically, if you start shooting then try to dash, the shots will change to go in the direction of the dash, and almost certainly won't hit anything. It's only a mod, so I can't really complain, but I wanted to be able to dash beside an enemy while shooting at them, and have that shooting track for some real anime action. It did work well with the laser when shooting at a massive target like a boss, as you might have seen back in that montage. But the main thing I wanted to say about this part of my Phantom Brigade experience is that it was really, really fun. I enjoyed playing this so much more than the actual game that my big takeaway for the whole video might as well be, make it like this. This meaning really high player damage, solo mech play so it's really fast, and prioritize mobility and finesse, with the phrase anime action written on a big whiteboard in an office to in some way get this across. The not quite real-time, not quite turn-based Armored Core action RPG type game that this magically created was Phantom Brigade 3.0, and at last I was like, yes, I'm actually going to finish this game now. I smelled some potential, and this is what it was. Had the original game been this, would I have actually been saying, oh, I wish you controlled the whole squad. I wish it was a more careful and considered squad shooter? Yes. Remember, you can never win with Devin, but maybe you'll get some nice video game design tidbits to think about amid the madness. We're going to quite rapidly progress towards the end of the game now, because basically the latter third of the game is just exactly what we've seen already. We've got 2 or 3 more region grinds, same as everything we've done before, and then you make it to the final sequence. The gateway to that is yet another battle with a giant enemy crab, so while I solo this guy, let me briefly speculate on something that probably isn't obvious from this video. Topic: this game is secretly a roguelike, pejorative. Well, kind of anyway. My actual point is that loads of stuff in the game is random, and after playing it loads of times now, there was this feeling of the difficulty being substantially easier or harder in some runs versus others due to luck. The loot you get, the perks on weapons, the perks on your pilots, the missions that spawn, the regions it lets you play, it's all randomized, for whatever reason. But aside from this, the game doesn't really support repeated play or attempting to get a good run by gambling on RNG in a roguelike type way, because it's supposed to be played in this agonizingly slow and methodical way that makes replaying a section a nightmare. But certainly you can restart the campaign over and over, for example, until your starting squad has better traits. RNG decides what traits you can unlock by leveling, and when you prestige it re-rolls, and they get different ones, so you need to get lucky and have useful ones appear for your equipment builds in order to do a build, essentially. There's no point diving deeper than that, but letting the player simply make the build themselves would make more sense for a single-shot, non-roguelike design dessiné. I think they were secretly trending towards making a more arcadey with roguelike elements type game, because, well, that's the done thing, isn't it? It's the path of least resistance in pure game design work required to make a game. Yet since the game totally isn't that, I found these randomization elements strange. Basically every time something was random, like what perks a weapon has, I say that should be something you as a player can decide and customize. E.g. you can change the perks somewhere, you can access the full level up tree for your pilots and pick your destination when traveling on the world map, according to your own reasons, some mechanical reasons. My only exception would be the mission spawn system. That feels normal to be random. You're simulating the opportunities arising and going away in a way you don't understand. Although secretly, what I want is to scrap the phases system altogether and let you just challenge the final battle of a region at any time, so it's your decision when to do it and under what circumstances, and it's all less random too. Get that whiteboard out again, I'm going to wave my hands over it, and now it says, not a roguelike, it's a Breath of the Wild-like. And then I take my consultancy fee and leap out the window. Right, so let's get to the end of this game so we can all stop listening to me. After grinding our way to the top, we arrive at the final region. Here we've got 2 special missions. It's gameplay content time, we made it. Before I went into the first one, I was playing around with the equipment and essentially internalizing some of the weapon cynicism I've displayed so far, finding that a generic assault rifle is just better than everything else, and that also that weapon level increases damage way more than I expected. At higher levels, the jumps in damage are massive. Then again, playing with triple damage makes all damage balancing disappear into the distance with not so much as a goodbye, so there isn't much point in me looking too closely at the numbers here, I don't think. Let's attack the capital in this 2-mission sequence and save the proud nation of those guys from the dreaded enemy. Those other guys. We blast into the first of the ending missions, the perimeter breach. The goal is to get to the other side of the map. Easy enough, but you have to get there with only a limited number of enemies left alive. Yes, it's dangerously close to being a kill the enemies mission, but it's a little different, so I'm going to count this as new content. The twist is the enemy are being reinforced, so it's possible to get below the threshold, then pop back up and have to keep fighting before going to the place, which I think is what happened to me. While I do that, I realised I need to finish up some earlier ranting that was left hanging, so let's round up a few things. Topic: stuff about certain types of attacks. First things first, I should mention status effects. There are certain classes of weapon designed to set enemies on fire, knock them over, or electrocute them, applied via status effect build-up. I didn't really use them because you could have been shooting the enemy during that time. Again, my insta-kill enemies balancing choices probably invalidate any take I can make on status effects, but I wanted to say that I did want to see status effects be applied by things that aren't attacks, such as drone strikes, grenades, the environment, what have you. Then you don't have to balance it against regular damage weapons, and it's all more viable and varied and such. That'll do for this point. Next point, critical hits. I mentioned before I didn't like the critical hit system, and it's because I got stung. There are various perks you can get that improve either critical hit rate or damage, yet the secret I flashed earlier is that depending on pilot class, critical hit rate is either always 0 or it's an unspecified base amount. If I remember right, our engineer class here has a 10% chance with any weapon with the medium range trait. How do I know that? I think I saw it in a comment online somewhere, and there's your problem. There exists a critical hit system in the game that is occasionally referred to, but I think the only place it's ever UI'd to the player is that sometimes the sound of a shot hitting an enemy is different. That means you critted them. It does double damage, I claim, based on nothing at all. We just needed a more full integration of critical hits as a mechanic, or remove it, that works too. It's not very important in this game. The main offender is just that your crit rate isn't ever displayed, making it possible to never realize it's hard-coded to be 0 for the majority of pilot weapon combinations, and you might take perks thinking you're increasing it when you're just multiplying stuff by 0. Yes, they nearly removed this mechanic from the game, like they've zeroed out most of the critting in the game. But there is a lingering perk, a lingering use case, a lingering thing that increases your crit rate from unknown number to unknown number, and it makes you think there must be more going on here, and there just isn't. I want to allege that this confusion arises from the game being redeveloped in its 2.0 version, and the overhaul left certain things unsaid to the player. Along the lines of the beta blocker, oh, the player surely already knows this mindset, where like your core of beta players can't help you realize stuff isn't true about the game because they've already seen behind the curtain, they know too much. I might come back to this topic at the end. The next catch-up point is, I don't like rockets in this game. Why? Because they're slow and it's lame. That's about it really. When you fire missiles, it takes a turn or sometimes 2 turns to actually hit something. And so much happens in that time that I just don't like it. It's lame in the same way that having a 30-meter engagement range is lame. Rockets are really fast. I'd like to see that included, perhaps mechanically balanced, by requiring radar lock first and having the firing procedure overheat you. Since for once that would make sense for your overheating mechanic, you're turning your mech into a walking rocket launch pad. I think missiles should be A, very limited, and B, ultra powerful. That's the dynamic I was looking for, apparently. It's even slightly explored by the game, where certain missile launchers are quite good and have limited ammo, but it's still like more than you'd ever need. Their power comes from the fact you can hide in the corner and have shots arc down from afar over cover. but I think you should just be able to do this like twice and absolutely nuke the target with guaranteed damage, and then be left with a weak mech using a sidearm as a punishment. They sort of started going there, but I just don't think they made it. Yes, my balancing preference for glass cannons is back here essentially, but this time I've got the rule of cool on my side because slow missiles just look silly. The final point I put in the notes was accuracy. Just the word accuracy. I don't remember what my problem was. I think I wanted all weapons to have 100% accuracy, that must be it, because I do like to inject more determinism to get more puzzly strategy. Weapons do have accuracy levels, the game does not mention them. So on average, your weapons do less damage than it says they do, or even no damage. And I guess that's unusual. Like, it's strange not to say the chance to hit in a turn-based tactics game that's usually all about that number in particular. And this probably contributed to my whole confusion about the damage drop-off stat from earlier where I thought it was accuracy. Let's just say that if our supercomputer can predict the actual future, it can probably give me a firing vector that is literally guaranteed to hit. So we don't need any random element when it comes to aiming. Unless you want to let me aim the shots myself, like some kind of Armored Core Valkyria Chronicles crossover, aka the game I actually want, but I'm mercifully not demanding it in every frame of this video, in order to appear more reasonable. Well, I think that'll do. Let's see if I've broken through the enemy yet. This mission was fun. There, I said it. I'm kind of skipping everything at this point, but I wanted to remind you once again that playing this game with one mech makes those planning stages both really involved and really immediate. I found this to be really good as a balance of action and strategy, and since things often get hairy because the whole map is always targeting you, it's still challenging even if you can one-shot most enemies most of the time. It's not good enough to be in such a repetitive game, that's the weakness, but the foundational game feel of it all provides the you could make a game out of that material. The core gameplay is really good, and I think about it often still, but I don't think about actually playing Phantom Brigade. I want a different, more creative game to feel like this. I'm resisting the urge to just say, I wish this was Mount & Blade Warband yet again. But yes, Mech and Blade, Warband, Tactics, Revengeance, that's the image of perfection that my mind is trying in vain to capture in my comments on this game. I should mention that I also failed to Iron Man this campaign. I did die at least once and had to reload. It was a simple case of making a mistake and then just getting hit with a shot that crashed me and it cancels your turn, so you then just get hit by everything else on the map and you die basically if you ever stumble. It's got that almost Souls-like easy when it works, but you can still just die at any time vibe, which I mention only so that I can say Souls-like in this video. Is this the Dark Souls of turn-based tactics mech shooters? No, but if it was an Armored Core Valkyria Chronicles crossover, it might be. Another misc thing to say is that I originally only wanted to have one pilot in the base, to make this more of a solo run. But I think the game just randomly gives you more pilots if you lack them, as a sort of pity mechanic now and again, they just appear. You can still kick them out, however I reached max level way too fast because playing solo automatically triples your XP earned. Therefore, to get a slightly more fun experience out of the game, I did bring in the other pilots and just leveled them up instead of the original guy, to see what perks or builds I might get while always still having one active pilot at least. And I was basking in the secretly roguelike nature of the random traits that re-randomize when you prestige level for some reason. It would be interesting to try and shove what prestige leveling and forgetting your traits is into the plot with the whole timey-wimey magic machine breaks your brain angle I had earlier. Something, my solo run wasn't as solo as it could have been, but I did keep to one mech per battle at least. And being purely solo would matter because the pilot dying would game over you, whereas here, I'll fail the mission if a pilot dies, but I can just do it again with the next pilot, even if I don't reload or save. For all my complaints about wanting things to be hardcore, when given the choice, I clearly just want to have fun. So there's a good reason to ignore what I've been saying, if you somehow don't have enough reasons to ignore what I'm saying already. I'm rambling because I actually didn't like this final mission, and it's a shame to go out on a bad note. For this one, you have to shoot a laser at a building in order to symbolize the fall of the dreaded Team Red regime, and nothing says that the honorable blue team is back in town like blowing up a skyscraper in a major metropolitan area. Just Cause 3 had this problem as well, if you saw my video on that. They would never let this be published after 9/11. Oh wait. We're left with a try not to die challenge, where we need to defend our corner while we charge a giant laser we found behind a bush or something. Yes, we just have this giant laser on our vehicle, and no, you don't get to play with it, no, you don't get any mechanics, you don't deserve it. The added twist is that the enemy have a ship in a nearby canal that will rain shots and missiles on your team. And when your team is only one mech, you're going to get targeted quite a lot. I've got a build that allows me to dash without building up heat, so I'm just going to be wildly jumping everywhere and trying to use every second of heat capacity to thin out the hordes. Then we can go and attack the boat as well to remove its attacking parts to reduce the pressure. In the meantime, topic: how do we fix pilot damage? I mentioned I've self-banned railguns and axes because it's too easy to use their attached pilot damage mechanics to either ignore line of sight or enemy stats in general. But it remains the case that all enemies having this second health bar that unbalances everything that doesn't interact with it could be a problem. This builds on what I said earlier, where you shoot at a mech and various things will decide which of the mech's many health bars go down. This doesn't apply to pilot damage, so if you shoot a mech in the finger with a weapon that does 10 pilot damage, the pilot takes 10 damage. Shoot a mech in the antenna with a weapon that does 12 pilot damage through 40 meters of reinforced concrete, it'll probably still do like 6 pilot damage somehow, but at 41 meters, that's the end of the weapon range and it goes to 0. Rant, rant, rant. The very idea that you can kill the pilot inside the armor without damaging the armor seems to invalidate other strategies. I heard in the 1.0 version it used to be more unbalanced in this regard, so I wanted my thesis on this to be we need to avoid the idea of concussion damage, or however the game is justifying this, and have armor be more about penetration protection versus weight only. That means light weapons can't damage heavy armor, that sort of setup. I immediately smell more puzzle strategy scenarios arising, and more variety in how you react to enemy builds. I imagine mechs having a set amount of integrity, perhaps just unified across the board, they're always the same. And then armor gets you a damage reduction from all damage at its armor rating and below. Sort of like Helldivers 2's armor mechanics, basically that's what I mean. You need a variety of weapon weights to pierce different armors, or to use more status effects, smoke, more tactics even, to deal with opponents who are heavy enough that you can't damage them with a particular mech. So what about pilot damage then? I kind of see the pilot as another one of the parts in this setup, where how much armor is over the pilot depends on the unit. If you can break the armor on their pod, you can kill them, simple as that. But if you can't, you've got to try something else. Maybe it's easier to shoot the arms off. I guess I'm veering towards a version of the game in my imagination here where you're targeting specific parts with an aiming choice. I think you might have to have that for this to work. Maybe that's my problem as well. As in, I'm describing a game where you'll tell your anti-materiel rifle sniper bot to take an 85% chance to hit shot that penetrates the enemy pilot pod, and that's how pilot damage comes in and becomes a mechanic. Something fine detailed like that. Shall I just go and play Helldivers 2? Probably. Still, having armor be deflection/damage reduction based gets you one step closer to the pilot not automatically being the weak point and just sort of breaking the balancing because of that. You could just scrap pilot damage and replace it with penetration level. Level 3 penetration weapons on level 2 pilot armor, the pilot dies. Level 4 pilot armor, it doesn't do anything. Now what? Nice and simple, very puzzle tacticsable, a bit of variety in engagement plans for different enemy mechs, like super strong and slow, or fast but the pilot is exposed, and everything in between. The pilot is a part, that's my design motto, maybe even replacing the torso part to keep it simple. Now excuse me while I continue just thinking about Helldivers 2, but it's Armored Core, but it's Valkyria Chronicles, but it's Code Geass. and you don't have to pay money for it, but it runs on all devices, and it only takes 3 days to develop. Hey ChatGPT, I've got a job for you. Here's another point I forgot to mention on the gameplay, so I'll quickly tell you about it now. Barriers. Some mech parts give you barriers on your armor that regenerate up to some maximum amount per battle. However, it doesn't even matter what the amount is, because simply having damage taken not be persistent means that all that stuff about camping and strategy surrounding that can be ignored. You will basically always have full health and never need to use camp supplies if most of your damage is taken on barriers, which just makes it not count basically. That's especially good if you don't have a full complement of mechs and pilots as I do right here. I'm tempted to launch into a "it's so good it invalidates everything else blah blah blah" style rant, which I feel about many weapons, but it's too late. Let's just get to the end at this point. After spending some time using civilian buildings as cover against missile strikes, it's time to extend our war crimes because our laser is ready to fire. The game tastefully censors the part where a skyscraper is blown up and collapsed in a major metropolitan area for no particular military purpose, probably because they didn't want to make an animation for this happening, but it also provides some deniability in our war crimes hearings. Giant lasers can't melt steel beams, we shall argue. Now what does that do? Well, nothing right away, because the game wants you to actually kill all the enemies. And while striking military targets seems like a waste of ammunition, there weren't that many left after my anime rampaging, so it's easy enough. The difficult part is that you need to kill the ship, and the ship's main guns are powerful enough to rip right through the buildings at close range. But I found you could approach the ship from such an angle that the remaining gun turret is forced to fire into the ship itself, which doesn't actually do damage, unfortunately, but it does count as indestructible cover, so we can use that. It took a while to kill this ship because you have to destroy every single part of it, even after all its weapons are gone, and even with triple damage this takes a while, although remember that despite my cheat damage, you're supposed to have 4 mechs, i.e. quadruple the damage potential, so even though my anime rampage is fueled by the fact I have an overpowered mech, it's still theoretically less powerful and more vulnerable than the 4-person mech team in the default balancing. So I don't want to feel like I hacked my way here. This is a somewhat legitimate achievement. Again, I cut out all of the gameplay in this run of the campaign, but there's a lot of thought going on and going into every part of this anime rampage, and that's the fun part of the game not shown here. It's another not shown here critical point in an off-ED commentary. I have achieved this massive and very negative series of rants by strategically cutting out all of the good bits. But that's only because the good bits are very cerebral, they're only able to be experienced by the player in the moment. I think it's a sign of depth, really. I think I do recommend Phantom Brigade in this solo overpowered mech mode. If you want some actual evidence that I found it to be good, I finished the whole game like this, even after complaining that the game was too long and repetitive and I was bored by it. So the results have to speak for themselves to counter my arguments to some degree, don't they? Would I have done all of that if I wasn't gathering footage for a rant on the internet? Well, that's the real killer point that brings down all game criticism and commentary, the artificiality of quote-unquote having to play something, which forces upon you takes that real people in the wild won't have when optionally volunteering to play something over the 1 trillion other activities they could be doing in life. So all I'll conclude is that playing Phantom Brigade, if you mod it and impose weird house rules, is fun enough that being forced to play it by the Grand Council of all the Gods is tolerable. Now there's some watered-down praise for the marketing quote. I give such considerations because this is the conclusion of the game. Did we save the blue team from the red team? Yes, maybe we did. I'm very unnationalist. I don't know if it's better that the blue team regained control. I mean, the red team provided good, stable jobs building giant robot spiders, or whatever nonsense they got up to around here. Building skyscrapers, I suppose, which the blue terrorists have destroyed. Some even say that they are secretly controlling your fate with some kind of time machine and must be stopped. Well, as I often seem to comment, I want to see the villains of the game be a direct problem to be solved. And if you don't want to do that, you can always just say, well, the Kassad Emperor killed your dog, and make that the whole justification. Yes, I suppose it was mean of Kassad, the Red Guys, to invade in the first place. But I think we should have taken the Phantom Brigade to invade them as punishment, and then maybe trade our territories back or agree to stop stopping time in a deal, if only to avoid killing our own civilians, or to force Kassad back home, and then the Fearland army, that's the green guys you see around the place sometimes, they could make a comeback thanks to your efforts. Again, I'm just starting to think of Phantom Blade. Sun Tzu says, just walk behind them, dude. Yes, you don't have to rise to the enemy's provocations, you have free will, and if all the giant enemy crabs are here, then maybe their unguarded capital is ripe for a bit of good old-fashioned time-stopping, deterministic ultra-strategy action. Yes, I said you have free will just now, but according to this computer, well, it's complicated. What are you talking about? You say, ah, I knew you'd say that, just as the machine predicted, and I've already dodged your question by moving swiftly on to the next point, which is that the game does continue after you finish it, asking you to take out more regions, the ones you randomly weren't allowed to go to earlier, if you so please. I did not so please, so that's the end of my Phantom Brigade campaign commentary. During the credits of the game, I noted it had two different dev teams listed, a 1.0 team and a smaller 2.0 team. I remember being surprised the dev team was so massive. It's always very easy to forget that making video games is basically impossible, and it takes ridiculous amounts of effort to do really basic things. And even getting things just nearly correct is miraculous in the end. Does that mean I will cut some slack with complaining about every minor one-click too many UX thing? Well, probably not, because it's too fun to moan. Anyway, my point is that after I got back to the title screen, there was something there talking about this being version 2.0 of the game, and I was now sufficiently inspired to check this out, and it brought up a post listing all of the changes in 2.0. I didn't look too deep into this, but what I wanted to say is that as I looked through these changes, they're saying, well, we changed this, we added this, and I quickly thought, well, wait a second. According to this, the entire game was added in a patch. Pilot progression and leveling up was a patch, the campaign map was a patch, the very format of the game where you grind battles to liberate provinces in phases and manage fatigue and health with the camping system, all of that was patched in. Then there's loads of stuff about adding maps and mission types, the thing I've been facetiously implying they should have done more of because it's too repetitive as it stands IMO, and it seems like some of the roguelike elements, as I called them, the random equipment stuff and RNG-based paths through the map, that was added in to make the game less repetitive, coming with the implication that the devs expect you to play the whole campaign multiple times, and hence it needs to be randomized to some extent, which I don't really agree with, even though, yes, I know I actually did do this, I know this undermines my own argument. I guess my point is that if replay value is important, it needs to be way more random than this, but I don't necessarily think replay value needs to be important for this game, it can be a one and done thing. The point is, I thought it was strange how many things that I would imagine were core to the game, things that felt so normal, were added by this extra dev team later on. Ages ago in this commentary I was saying something like, I can't believe they didn't make the battle replay system the core feature of the game and then just design the whole thing around that. Well, here's the truth of it. The game was originally designed with almost nothing it eventually had. I'm guessing 1.0 was more of a literal mission select screen, compared to the figurative one I cynically call the campaign map, with just mechs with no pilots or something. It was just like a little series of combat challenges or puzzles, almost kind of what I was asking the game to be more like in this commentary, come to think of it. Well, I don't know the full story, but I want to note there is a story, because someone decided this game needed an overhaul. They came in and they did it, so thanks for that. Maybe it was actually an early access release sort of transition where they knew it wasn't going to cut it already, and they had to radically improve it to make people outside of their inner circle like it. Perhaps this was a heartwarming tale of game design passion, perhaps a tale of a publisher freaking out when they saw what their dev team had achieved or hadn't achieved. Whatever the case, it seems that the newer product added so much of the core mechanical stuff that it must have been an improvement. And that was the Phantom Brigade campaign, or at least enough bits of it pieced together that I think we covered the whole thing here. My sum-up description of the game will have to be that we've got the foundation of a game I really like here, only the default experience isn't it. With some modding, renovation and abuse of the difficulty sliders, I was able to make a new Phantom Brigade experience that compelled me to play it about twice as much as the intended approach, and indeed I don't think there was much hope of me actually getting to the end with the intended approach, simply because it was taking such a long time and it wasn't good enough. The idea of simultaneous turns and the timeline system are well done and smoothly implemented. The main thing I want to use this for is to make mech combat tactical superhot brackets code gears, and since Phantom Brigade ultimately did allow me to do that a bit, I pretty much have to praise its versatility. All I will do now is call for a game that fully supports the sort of action TBT hybrid approach I'm going for here, and we'll be good to go. All of my modifications aside, I do feel the core game is a little bare bones. Since the campaign map gameplay is quasi-pointless, the plot is quasi-existent, and the possible aspect of building mechs and pilots in a way where you bond with them, they bond with each other, like something is happening over time, is just not there. Even the almost nothing that XCOM has isn't there. The biggest single missing link is you don't see the pilots very much, they don't talk, and there are no mechanics surrounding like the pilots interacting or bonding or whatever at all. There's some humanity you could latch onto here in this game. It all leaves us with a very neutral feeling game. Quote unquote, you run around killing quote unquote them, and at the end, nothing happens. Like whatever caused this war was never resolved or even mentioned. I'm not sure anyone really wanted us to liberate the land, but we did it anyway, and all it cost was obliterating the concept of free will. This is where the code gearsification I keep post-ironically requesting would really fill in some gaps. So Phantom Brigade doesn't have much, but that very inner core it does have, the simultaneous turn-based mech battling, remains good enough to be the glue holding all of this nothing together. Essentially, an XCOM-sized effort is now needed to make this into a full-blown, all-rounder kind of game with more appeal, and more to do on the campaign map and tighter combat and all the rubbish I've been moaning about. But the core difficulty of making that product, which is putting a highly experimental real-time turn-based hybrid thing into action and managing to put a working UI on it, that part is done, and that's the most exciting development that Phantom Brigade represents. And that's the game. One tiny final point that I must report is that about 2 out of 3 times when I loaded the game, it had no sound until I restarted it for unknown reasons. It also took a really long time to start the EXE. It often looked like nothing happened after I hit play. It seems to load a lot of stuff before any loading screens or any windows open. Although, I think I saw somewhere in the patch notes they were aware of this and were trying to fix it. Possibly they did after I played the campaign, because it was still being patched while I got this footage ages ago. So yes, I had some technical issues that slightly soured my mood by making getting from my desktop to the main menu, that part of the gameplay, surprisingly difficult and frustrating and repetitive even. The next thing I'll rant about is going to be the base defense RTS city builder type thing known as Cataclysmo, where you make walls and shoot arrows at flesh-eating lumps in a miserable hellscape, and it's actually a way more relaxing vibe than it sounds. So thanks for watching this Phantom Brigade campaign commentary, but of course, because I have a machine that predicts the next insert length of the video here seconds, I always knew you'd watch the whole thing. A railgun bolt is currently tunneling through the Earth's crust toward your location, so watch out. Phantom Brigade 2 Off the Rails edition, where railguns are reworked, that's a more modest request than everything else I said, isn't it? Even more modest than asking you to like, comment, subscribe, and watch other videos for more rants. See you next time, Brigadiers.